Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On February 26, 1984, a neighbor living below Susan Agin's apartment at 3412 Ocean Harbor Drive in New York called the Nassau County Police Department with a worrisome report. When the authorities arrived on the site, they discovered something very terrible. Between the bedroom and the hall, they discovered the lifeless body of Susan Agin, a mother of 3 who was 41 years old. In an even more horrifying discovery, the police also found Susan's 17-year-old son Richard's lifeless body in the master bedroom. Richard may have been the one who committed these horrible crimes. What could have motivated someone to carry out this unimaginable tragedy? Today we're exploring the horrific and puzzling double killing of Susan Agin and her son Richard Agin, which rocked the country in 1984. Let's get started without further delay. With its magnificent waterfront residences and expensive properties, Ocean Harbor Drive is a charming coastal highway that is tucked away along New York's shoreline and radiates elegance and peace. The wealthy and those looking for a tranquil coastal lifestyle are drawn to this highly sought private area. But occasionally, the charm of New York's Ocean Harbor Drive can mask the dark sides that lie beneath its splendor. The tragic and eerie story of Susan Agin and her son Richard serves as a sobering warning that evil may lurk even in the most bucolic places. Born in 1942, Susan K. Agin experienced a turbulent life. As her marriage to L. Agin broke down, she had the courage to stand up for herself and leave her spouse. Alongside her 3 children, Richard, Karen, and Michael, she started living on her own and starting over. She accepted hope for a better future at 3412 Ocean Harbor Drive in Long Island, Fresh York, where her fresh beginning began. She gradually blended in with the neighborhood and made friends with her neighbors in her tranquil surroundings. Her attempts to make a fresh start appeared promising, and she felt a feeling of community when neighbors would periodically stop by her house. She had no idea that the appearance of a typical life she had laboriously built would soon be cruelly destroyed. On February 26, 1984, 11-year-old Michael Agin was returning home from a local hockey game when the innocence of a normal Sunday was shortly to be transformed into a nightmare. He was confronted with a horrible and terrifying scene instead of the comforting embrace of his mother. His mother, Susan Agin, was lying dead in the hallway. The young youngster would be haunted by the unthinkable scene of her body being brutally battered and strangled for years to come. He hurried to a neighbor's house right away and begged for assistance. The Nassau County Police Department responded to the distress call from Susan's downstairs neighbor, whose identity was withheld. Upon entering the house, they saw Susan's motionless body in the hallway on the 2nd floor, directly in front of the master bedroom. It was immediately apparent to the cops that she had been assaulted. But as the police entered the master bedroom, the most sinister discoveries were still to come. The police discovered Richard, Susan's 17-year-old son, dead when they entered the bedroom. Officers Otto Cole and Myron Ed Carter of the Nassau County Police Department asked for help after making sure the area was secure. Following his arrival at the crime scene, Detective Herb Dobb began a thorough investigation. A white bedsheet that was found near Susan's body and smeared with blood was recovered by the forensic team. They also gathered pieces of hair from the bandana that had been used to choke her. Additionally, bodily fluids were discovered within the house and gathered as proof. The bedroom looked like it had been ransacked, like a scene from a failed heist. A pocketbook's contents were strewn all over the bed, and the doors to the dressers were left open. 2 latent fingerprints were found by the forensic team during the crime scene examination. The first was taken from a banker's seat that was discovered among the strewn-about objects on the bed, and the second was taken from the plastic bag that Richard Agin had been suffocated in, which was still covering his face. The collected evidence was then forwarded to the lab for additional processing and analysis. Investigators conjectured that Richard had suddenly returned home during his mother's assault. In light of this notion, he was killed after seeing the crime in order to stop him from speaking. Although this notion appeared to be supported by the preliminary evidence, it would be difficult to prove. Forensic analysis did not have the sophisticated and advanced methods that are now available in 1984. Because of this restriction, it was more harder to draw firm conclusions from the material that was gathered. The traditional procedures and technologies that investigators had to use might not have yielded as accurate and comprehensive information as contemporary forensic techniques. Detective Charlie Costello of the Crime Lab's Fingerprint Division was testing latent fingerprints taken from the bag used to strangle Richard and another from the bankruptcy taken from Susan's purse in August 1984 because he thought they might be those of the intruder. Costello used the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS, to process the prints, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not discover a match in the system. The detectives chose to expand their investigation by getting fingerprints from local residents who had a history or background in burglary because there were no prior criminal records related to the murder. The goal was to find a possible match, or lead, that would assist them reduce the number of suspects by comparing these fingerprints with those recovered from the crime scene. Despite being time-consuming, this approach was meant to broaden their investigation's scope and raise the likelihood of discovering a link to the offender. The investigators tested a large number of fingerprint samples from possible suspects over the course of months, but they were unable to match the fingerprints recovered from the crime scene. They brought in as many samples as they could throughout time, but none of them produced any findings. Unfortunately, they ran out of fresh fingerprints to analyze after over a year of thorough investigation, and the case ultimately ended without any clues or potential suspects. Detective Charlie Costello decided to try his luck again on January 22, 2002, after 18 years, and ran another fingerprint through AFIS in the hopes of making a breakthrough. He was quite relieved to receive a favorable outcome this time. Costello was able to match a fingerprint from a school bus driver application with the fingerprint on the evidence. Louis Talisi was the applicant's name. Investigators discovered that Louis Talisi was 42 years old at the time of the incident and had a history of drug use after finding this match. Detectives were cautious and patient, choosing to obtain more tangible evidence before making an arrest. After Louis Talisi was named as the cold case's lead suspect, in order to identify body fluid stains on the evidence gathered from the murder scene that would otherwise be invisible to the human eye, McCarthy used an ultraviolet beam in February 2002 for DNA analysis. McCarthy collected the fluid successfully and used it to recover a partial DNA profile. With this partial DNA profile in hand, the investigators realized they were one step closer to a conclusive case, a sample of Louis Talisi's DNA to compare with the extracted profile and verify the match was now the only thing lacking. The time has come for them to locate Louis Talisi. Detective Tony Graziano, a talented and well-prepared undercover agent from the Nassau County Police Department, was tasked with obtaining Louis Talisi's DNA on May 10, 2002. Without telling Talisi about the investigation, he had to surreptitiously collect a secret DNA sample from the suspect. 11 a.m. Detectives Graziano and Sergeant Guido began their investigation by walking through Louis Talisi's home on May 10. This walkthrough was intended to help them become acquainted with the house's layout and collect any information that would be helpful when they spoke with Talisi. Detective Graziano took the initiative to build a relationship with Talisi after the walkthrough. In undercover operations, developing rapport is essential, since it helps you win the suspect's trust and confidence during the encounter. In order to establish a relaxed and welcoming environment, Graziano conversed with Talisi on a variety of subjects. The detectives were conscious that they needed to handle the matter tactfully and make sure Talisi didn't know what they were really trying to do. Gaining Talisi's trust sufficiently to get a secret DNA sample without arousing suspicion was their aim. Detective Graziano and Sergeant Guido continued their informal tour of Talisi's house, and Talisi smoked a cigarette while they spoke. They then went out onto the street, where Talisi finally threw away the cigarette butt without thinking anything was wrong. Their carefully crafted scheme was going according to plan. Sergeant Guido recovered the abandoned cigarette butt in a discreet manner after Talisi had left the area. Detectives Guido and Graziano lost no time in heading straight to the crime lab. Saliva and epithelial cells were meticulously separated from the cigarette butt filter in the crime lab. To ensure that any possible impurities were eliminated, the DNA included in the sample was isolated and purified. Now that the cigarette butt's DNA profile was ready, it was time to compare it to the partially extracted DNA profile that had been taken from the crime scene evidence earlier. When the time came, as anticipated, the comparison showed that the two DNA samples were an unquestionable match. The findings unmistakably connected Louis Talisi to the crime scene and the killings of Susan and Richard Eigen, proving that he was the murderer. Louis Talisi was ultimately taken into custody on June 5, 2002, following the development of a strong case and tangible evidence against him. He was taken downtown by law authorities to the Nassau County interviewing room to be questioned. The detective's evidence, which included the vital fluids sample that connected Louis Talisi to the crime scene, was presented to him. Talisi showed his slyness by spotting a possible defense tactic right away. He admitted to knowing Susan and shrewdly asserted that he was physically involved with her. He said that this clarified why his bodily material was found in Susan's house and implied that it had nothing to do with the killings. Talisi added that he was a Brooklyn resident at the time of the killings and had met the Eigners through acquaintances who shared a residence with them. Afterwards, Talisi had previously met the Eigners multiple times. He was not an invited guest on the day of the murder, the detectives claimed. Although the cold case detectives didn't trust Talisi's statement, they were aware of the possible complications it could cause in court. They knew it was important to handle it carefully. However, they had one more piece of information that was crucial, a trump card that, if used properly, would prevent Talisi from fleeing. 2 hair strands, obtained from the bandana used to strangle Susan Eigen, were turned over to DNA analyst Terry Melton on July 3, 2002. Melton then used the hair samples to create a DNA profile. Comparing this freshly acquired DNA profile with Louis Talisi's pre-existing DNA profile, the Eigen double murder case was turned over to the Nassau County District Attorney's Office following the conclusion of the investigation and the development of a compelling case against Louis Talisi. The team led by the district attorney went over the evidence and got ready for the trial. Trial proceedings started when the case was added to the court's docket. For Susan and Richard Eigen, Assistant DA Robert Biancavilla created a painting depicting death that Talisi fashioned. Louis Talisi refused to admit to the killings in spite of the growing evidence against him. Michael Washore, his defense lawyer, presented a plan to raise a reasonable doubt in the jury's mind. Washore offered an alibi to refute the prosecution's case by claiming that Talisi was trying to have a family get-together on the day of the killings. Washore also raised the idea that other people who knew the Eigners might have committed the crimes in an attempt to disprove Talisi's involvement. Louis Talisi had the chance to make a brief appearance in court during the trial. He acknowledged the great loss experienced by the families of Susan and Richard Eigen and offered his sincerest condolences. He did, however, continue to stand by his claim that he was innocent of the crimes for which he was charged. In his speech before the court, Susan's son Michael Eigen described a disturbing memory that had plagued him ever since the killings. He described an instance in which he and his adolescent companion ended up on a boat with Louis Talisi 4 years after the horrific events. This unexpected meeting happened after Michael disclosed that Talisi's cousin lived next door to him. Michael's testimony indicated that Talisi seemed distressed, smoking and drinking, and spoke extensively about himself and his apparent sorrow in life. Michael proceeded to speak to the jury in the courtroom. Behind him, poster-sized pictures of his brother and mother. He talked about how the defense's representation of his mother during the trial had a profound impact on him. By bringing up other possible suspects and alternate situations, Louis Talisi's defense lawyer had tried to raise a reasonable doubt. They had so presented a skewed and unfavorable image of Susan Eigen. During the sentencing portion of the trial, 3 additional victims' family also spoke to the court in a stirring and poignant courtroom scene. Richard's father and Susan's ex-husband, Al Eigen, turned to Louis Talisi and told him bluntly how devastating his actions had been. He said the killings were the most horrifying crime he had ever seen, tearing a family apart. No term, Al Eigen said, could ever make up for the loss they had suffered. Nevertheless, he pleaded with the judge to give the convicted murderer the harshest punishment possible. He spoke with the sorrow of a parent who wants justice for his son and his beloved ex-wife. Susan's brother Eugene K. also spoke to the judge in tears, finding it difficult to express the profound hurt caused by Talisi's heartless behavior. He cried and inhaled deeply as he pleaded with the judge to take into account the defendant's extreme callousness and cruelty when deciding on the proper punishment. Karen Eigen, Susan and Richard's sister and daughter, was unable to attend the sentencing in person due to an emotionally stressful event. Rather, Wendy Woods, her closest friend, read a moving speech on her behalf. by stating that Karen had essentially lost her childhood on the day of the tragic occurrences. This comment demonstrated the profound impact that the killings had on her life. In her statement, Karen voiced her confusion and incredulity that someone who was capable of such horrible atrocities could continue to claim innocence while on trial. Robert Biancavilla, the assistant district attorney, made a strong argument against Louis Talisi. He claimed that Talisi intended to rob the Egeners specifically to fund his cocaine addiction. The prosecution's argument states that Talisi entered the Egeners' house with the intention of stealing money and valuables. But when he found Susan Egan inside the house, the break-in took a terrifying turn. During the robbery, Susan was brutally attacked by Talisi, who then killed her. When Richard Egan unexpectedly entered the house during the break-in, the situation became much more heated. The prosecution argued that Talisi killed Richard as well because he was afraid his crime would be discovered and didn't want to leave any witnesses. Louis Talisi's defense was ineffective due to the prosecutor's strong case during the trial and the substantial evidence acquired by the cold case detectives. He had no way out of the dilemma because the evidence clearly showed that he was involved in the heinous crimes. In the end, Talisi was charged with aggravated assault, burglary, kidnapping, and second-degree murder. The victim's brother and son, Michael Egan, spoke to the court one more during the sentence hearing on June 2, 2004, making a tearful plea. He talked about how the killings had a significant effect on his life. Michael revealed that among the other items that Talisi took from him were his mother, his sibling, and his house. Judge Joseph Calabrese of Nassau County Court sentenced Louis Talisi to prison in light of the horrible nature of the murders and the terrible losses endured by the Egan family. For the 1984 killings of Oceanside mother and son Susan and Richard Egan, the judge imposed 2 consecutive sentences, ranging from 25 years to life in prison. Talisi was informed by Judge Joseph Calabrese that he did not see any justification for extending any kind of indulgence or tolerance to him. The judge stressed that Talisi had killed his victims in a way that was purposeful and meant to bring them the most agony and suffering possible. In addition, Calabrese noted that Talisi had shown no remorse for his crimes during the trial. Following the sentencing, Michael Egan talked to media about his feelings on Louis Talisi's persistent claims of innocence. He claimed that Talisi's failure to acknowledge his guilt was in line with a pattern of conduct that he had displayed throughout his life. Michael suggested that Talisi's actions could be interpreted as a sign of his reluctance to accept accountability. Michael admitted that a part of his mind took comfort in the fact that Talisi would be imprisoned for at least 50 years because of successive life sentences, and that the offender would be living with the consequences of his crimes for a considerable amount of his life. Michael was prepared to start letting go of the tragedy that had plagued them for so long. Louis Talisi died while incarcerated in 2005, 1 year after being found guilty of the murders of Susan and Richard Egan. The court sentence was shortened by his death, which signaled the end of his time in prison. What do you think about this instance then? After only a year in prison, do you believe the Egan family has fully come to terms with Talisi's passing? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. On May 28, 2008, a seemingly ordinary Wednesday, Moira Jones' life took an unexpected and tragic turn. Moira, a vibrant 40-year-old woman, went out on the town that evening with her boyfriend of 4 years, Paul Thompson. Moira chose Glasgow, Scotland, and the United Kingdom as her home. Her flat overlooks a lovely park in Glasgow South. In 2003, she left her previous life in London to work as an executive at Britvic. Glasgow quickly captured her heart, and she formed strong bonds with the city and its residents. Moira's fondness for Glasgow stemmed from the residents' warmth and friendliness, as well as their infectious sense of humor. The city, with its abundance of outdoor opportunities, proved to be an ideal place for someone who cherished the open air, trails, hills, glens, and beaches of Moira, providing her with numerous opportunities to explore and enjoy her love of the outdoors. Moira had intended to stay at Paul's house that fateful evening. She arrived with an overnight bag ready for a shared night. However, their argument changed her mind. Determined to sleep in her own flat, she set out for home, not realizing it would be a journey she would never complete. On the morning of May 29, 2008, a grim discovery was made in Glasgow's Queen's Park. A park ranger discovered a lifeless woman's body concealed behind a privet hedge. The tragic scene was nothing short of terrifying. The woman lay face down in the bushes, her lower body exposed, wearing only a pair of socks. Her jacket and bra had been torn, and her trousers were discarded between her legs. Moira's name and personal information were discovered nearby, leading the police to her apartment. To their dismay, there was no sign of Moira at home. They were concerned that the lifeless body they discovered could be hers. The authorities took immediate action and contacted Moira's parents, Beatrice, Bea, and Hubert Hugh Jones, who lived in Weston, Staffordshire. The agonizing message they delivered was that they believed Moira's body had been discovered, but they couldn't be certain. They needed the bereaved parents to identify their daughter with heavy hearts and unfathomable grief. Beatrice, Bea, and Hubert Hugh Jones made the somber trip to Glasgow. Their worst fears were confirmed when they saw the lifeless body. It was Moira, their beloved daughter. The unimaginable had become a harsh and cruel reality. Moira not only died tragically, but she also suffered the most horrifying fate. She was raped and beaten to death. Moira's younger brother, Grant, who lives all the way in Perth, Australia, received heartbreaking news of his sister's tragic death. He boarded the next available flight back to the United Kingdom, driven by a desire to be with his family during this extremely difficult time. As the investigation into Moira Jones's murder continued, the police faced a perplexing challenge. They had positively identified Moira, but her assailant remained unknown, elusive and unidentified. DNA evidence found on the lawyer's body had definitively ruled out her boyfriend, Paul, as a suspect. Nonetheless, the DNA profile obtained from the crime scene did not match anyone in the United Kingdom's extensive database. In their search for answers, the police cast a wide net, investigating the activities of 22 registered sex offenders living in the area and conducting interviews. They also spoke with people who had committed crimes near the park and underage drinkers who were known to frequent the area. Unfortunately, none of these conversations resulted in significant progress in the case. However, the investigators were able to piece together a timeline of events and obtain crucial CCTV footage showing a man in Moira's company. This unidentified man became the focus of the investigation, and police were eager to find and question him. The investigation's turning point occurred during door-to-door inquiries. When the police spoke with a woman named Lucy Pechlova, her information would prove to be the key to unraveling the mystery surrounding Moira Jones' tragic death. Lucy's account to the police revealed the presence of a man named Marek Harkar, a 6'3" old former Slovakian soldier. Lucy and Marek previously worked together in Liverpool in 2007. Marek arrived in Glasgow on May 18, 2008. When he needed a place to stay, Lucy offered him her bed on Queen's Drive. Marek's visit to Lucy's house, however, was not productive. Although he was supposed to be job hunting, he instead drank heavily and watched explicit videos. Marek left the bedside around 10 p.m. On May 28, allegedly drunk, and informed Lucy that he was going out to find a lady of easy virtue. Marek returned to the bedside around 3:15 a.m. According to Lucy, he looked different the next morning and appeared to be afraid of something. Surprisingly, Marek left the bedside on June 1, abandoning all of his belongings without warning. Later investigations revealed that Marek flew to the Czech Republic and then traveled by bus to Slovakia. Lucy handed over Marek's possessions to the police, who conducted DNA testing and discovered a crucial link to the crime, marking a significant breakthrough in the case. A Marek's black leather jacket was discovered to contain traces of Morris blood, providing compelling evidence with significant implications for the ongoing investigation. Marek Harkar's arrest and extradition to the United Kingdom marks a significant development in the Moira Jones case. He faced a number of serious charges, including murder, rape, and robbery, and his trial began on March 12, 2009, in Glasgow. Throughout the proceedings, Marek maintained a not guilty plea to all charges. The court heard that Marek arrived in the United Kingdom in 2007. Morris had been in Glasgow for only 10 days when he was tragically murdered. The prosecution's case centered on Marek as the perpetrator. They presented a compelling story, alleging that on the night of May 28, Moira was on her way home from her boyfriend's house. But Marek had completely different plans. He had been drinking heavily, including beer and vodka, and was overheard saying he was going out to find a woman. Moira returned to her flat, where she had originally planned to spend the night, carrying a large black overnight bag and parking her car about 60 yards away near Queen's Park, according to the prosecution. It was approximately 11:30 p.m. The prosecution claimed that at this point, Marek approached Moira and forced her to walk along a path with him. CCTV footage obtained from a passing first bus captured two people crossing Langside Road and walking along the perimeter of Queen's Park, providing crucial evidence. The jury noticed a stark difference in height and stature between the two figures in the footage. Moira, who stood only 5 feet, 4 inches tall and weighed less than 9 stone, appeared much smaller than the man accompanying her. The prosecution claimed that the towering figure was Marek, who, at 6 feet 3 inches and a kickboxing enthusiast, had a significant physical advantage over Moira. The prosecution also outlined the written Marek allegedly forced Moirato to accompany a witness who reported seeing a man and a woman near a holly bush near the tennis courts, where 6 buttons from the wire top and a cigarette buttock bearing Marek's DNA were found. Furthermore, CCTV footage captured a man exiting the park near Queen's Park Baptist Church on Ballvicker Drive at 2:15 a.m. The prosecution claimed that this individual was Marek, who had been alone at the time. The prosecution's case painted a bleak and distressing picture of the events at Queen's Park. According to their account, Mark Harker forced Moira into the park, assaulted her violently and sexually, and stole some of her belongings. The autopsy findings revealed the horrific extent of Moira's injuries and shed light on the harrowing attack she had to endure. Moira's autopsy results indicated that she did not die from her injuries before 2 a.m., implying that she may have survived her ordeal for about 2.5 hours. Moira had sustained 65 distinct blunt force trauma injuries as a result of punches, kicks, and stomps, according to the examination. These injuries were the result of severe and sustained blunt force trauma. A forensic pathologist identified 65 external injuries, including a broken nose and 2 black eyes. Moira suffered brain damage, fractures to her right cheekbone and larynx, and bruised ribs. She had extensive bruising on her head and face, and one of her front teeth had been knocked out. Bruising spread to her chest, back, legs, and buttocks. Dr. Black's compelling testimony, which revealed the tragic details surrounding Moira Jones' death, captivated the courtroom. Dr. Black, an expert witness, revealed that Moira's head and neck injuries were the primary factors contributing to her tragic death. In a chilling revelation, she suggested that small hemorrhages in Moira's eyes indicated a possible asphyxiation factor in her death. The presence of bruises on the backs of her hands and arms raised additional concerns, which Dr. Black described as common defensive injuries. Dr. Black's expert testimony also highlighted the distressing aspect of the case. There was no evidence of a weapon being used in the attack. Instead, she believed the injuries were caused by physical blows to the fists or feet. Moira speculated that the extensive bruising on her neck was caused by an arm, leg, or knee compressing more of his neck while she was on the ground. As Dr. Black described additional distressing findings, the courtroom atmosphere became increasingly somber. Moira's brain was bleeding between layers, and there was a moderate amount of blood in her windpipe, indicating the gruesome ordeal she had been through. It was later discovered that she had swallowed some of the blood during the attack. Dr. Black also revealed that Moira had consumed other items during the assault, including bark fragments, grassy fragments, plant cuticle fragments, and leaf skeleton fragments. The implications were chilling, implying that Moira had been forced to consume these items while alive. The final damning piece of evidence was the DNA discovery. A vaginal swab yielded a semen sample from the boy's body, and DNA found on more of his clothes and body matched Marek's DNA, with the jury being told that there was a 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance that it belonged to someone other than Marek. The courtroom was packed with witnesses, each contributing their own piece to the chilling puzzle of Moira Jones' murder. Several residents near Queen's Park reported hearing disturbing noises on the night of May 28. One woman who lives in a flat overlooking the park recalled a chilling incident in which a loud scream pierced the night, only to be abruptly silenced. Other couples strolling through the park reported hearing Moira's obvious distress. Even a cab driver turned to his partner and said, "If there was a murder, we just heard about it." It was a shocking revelation that, despite the busy street and the large number of people who heard a woman screaming and in distress, no one intervened or called the police, allowing the tragic events to unfold in silence. In addition, a neighbor who lived near the bedside where Merrick stayed provided compelling testimony. He described how Mara approached him on the night of May 28th, frantically saying, "I'm looking for a woman." In her closing statements, the prosecutor urged the jury to convict her based on the evidence presented. The prosecutor painted a chilling picture of the heinous murder witnessed by Moira Jones, pleading with the jury to base their decision on evidence, rather than the overwhelming emotional horror of the event. On the other side of the courtroom, the defense vehemently claimed that the police had charged the wrong man. They claimed that 3 other men were involved in the murder, despite Merrick's innocence, and that one of these men, Jason Mulrin, a convicted sex offender, was at Lucy's bedside during the crime. They pointed out similarities between his previous criminal acts and Moira's attack, emphasizing his lack of an alibi on the night Moira was killed. The defense also claimed that Jason confessed to the murder to his ex-girlfriend, who became so concerned that she reported it to the police. However, when Jason testified in court, he categorically denied any involvement in Moira's rape or death, contradicting the defense's allegations. The defense urged the jury to find Marek not guilty and to consider the possibility that another man was responsible for the murder. They also emphasized the importance of skepticism when evaluating the prosecution's DNA evidence, reminding the jury that scientists can only provide probabilities and that DNA should be viewed as one piece of evidence among many. Marek Harkar's fate now lay in the hands of the jury, which had the difficult task of determining the truth in this complex and chilling case. The trial lasted 20 days and kept the courtroom in suspense. However, the jury delivered its verdict quickly, finding Marek guilty of all charges in less than 2 hours. The judge imposed a harsh sentence, sentencing Marek to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. In the aftermath of Moira's tragic murder, her family turned their grief into a noble cause. They founded the Moira Fund, a charity that helps families in the United Kingdom who have been bereaved by murder. The charity provides grants to cover a variety of expenses, including funeral costs and transportation to court, assisting those in need during their darkest hours. Moira's memory continues to provide comfort and support to others who have experienced similar tragedies. Share your opinion with us in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more. In the quiet town of Aspen, Colorado, a chilling mystery unfolded on a cold winter's day in 2014. A heinous crime committed in secret shocked and stunned the community. An individual known and loved by many died tragically and unexpectedly, forever altering the tranquility of this picturesque mountain town. Nancy Pfister's life story begins in Orofino, Idaho, in July 1956, with her birth. She grew up in the picturesque suburb of Basalt, Colorado, and attended Bayside High School. Nancy's family had a unique connection to the development of the Buttermilk Ski Resort. Her father, Art Pfister, transformed the family cattle ranch into this well-known ski resort in 1958, making a large fortune in the process. Nancy's mother, Betty, has a remarkable background as well. She was a member of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots during World War I. She began her college career at Brooklyn's Pratt Institute before dropping out and returning to her roots in Colorado at the age of 20. Back home, she continued to play an important role in managing her family's business, which was well known in the local tourism industry at the age of 29. Despite never being married, Nancy welcomed her daughter Juliana into the world. At the age of 39, she gave birth to a son. Nancy Pfister's life was defined by her dedication as a single mother, raising her 2 children in the log home her father lovingly built for her in 1991. On the fateful day of February 26, a visit to Nancy and her friend Kathy Carpenter's home took an unexpected and terrifying turn. It had been 3 days since they had last seen or spoken, and Kathy's concern had grown too strong to ignore. Kathy walked into Nancy's house and called out for her friend, desperate for a response. However, the eerie silence that greeted her sent chills down her spine. Her heart sank as she noticed a chilling detail: a small smear of blood on Nancy's headboard. The room itself was disorganized, with the covers thrown aside as if there had been a fight, but the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Nancy's bedroom featured a large walk-in closet, and Kathy's concern grew when she discovered the door was locked. Desperate to learn the truth, she retrieved a spare key from the closet and cautiously opened the door. What she sensed was beyond her worst nightmares: a nauseating, unbearable stench. Inside the closet was a lifeless body. Kathy called 911 at 6:15 p.m., her voice trembling as she described the grisly discovery. She believed that the lifeless figure in the closet was Nancy herself. The arrival of the cops only confirmed Kathy's suspicions. Nancy's lifeless body was indeed hidden in the closet, shrouded in a heavy-duty trash bag from the neck down, with additional kitchen trash bags covering her head. The scene was a horrific display of violence. Nancy had been brutally beaten to death, her head showing signs of multiple blunt force traumas. An electrical extension cord had been cruelly wrapped around her neck, adding a chilling element to the crime. Despite the brutality of Nancy's attack, there was very little blood at the scene, with the exception of a small smear on the headboard. But when the investigators turned the mattress over, they discovered a large pool of blood soaked into the fabric. It soon became clear that whoever had attacked Nancy had taken the chilling step of flipping the mattress to conceal the gruesome aftermath before fleeing. The question that haunted both Kathy and the police was who could commit such a heinous and brutal act against Nancy. It was a question that sent shockwaves through their peaceful community, leaving them to deal with the unsettling realization that a heartless killer lived among them. Kathy Carpenter's revelation added another layer of complexity to an already perplexing case. She informed the police about recent tensions between Nancy and her tenants, William Trey Styler and his wife, Nancy Styler. This information immediately cast doubt on the Stylers and sparked speculation about their possible involvement in Nancy's brutal murder. The day after Nancy's lifeless body was found, an autopsy was performed by Dr. Steve Ayers, the Pitkin County coroner. His findings shed light on the severity of the crime. Dr. Ayers determined that Nancy died from 3 or 4 vicious blows to the head delivered with a hard object with a slightly curved edge. Although he couldn't identify the exact weapon used, he could tell that the business end of the instrument was small, about an inch or two. The exact timeline of Nancy's death remained unclear. Dr. Ayers estimated that the fatal assault occurred between the evening of February 24th and the morning of February 25th. Nancy's injuries were concentrated between her right forehead and right temporal bone, indicating 3 or 4 severe blows. In addition, several bruises covered her left upper arm, right neck, and right jaw, painting a bleak picture of the brutal violence she endured. Dr. Ayers concluded that Nancy Foster's death was the result of a homicide. The investigation took a significant step forward, escalating the search for truth and justice. The focus was now squarely on uncovering the truth about the Stylers' involvement, as well as any other potential suspects who could hold the key to solving this chilling and deeply unsettling murder mystery. The police investigation took a critical turn when they looked into the complex relationships between Nancy Foster, the victim, and the Stylers. Her tenants made it clear that there was more to the story than what first appeared. Nancy Foster's decision to rent out her luxurious mountain home during her annual warm weather vacations became an important piece of the puzzle. Her ad, on in the Aspen Times, was straightforward, offering a 3-bedroom home with 3.5 bathrooms, strategically located on the mountainside. The only rule was no cats. This advertisement piqued the interest of Trey and Nancy Styler, who were considering a fresh start in Aspen, away from their troubles in Denver. At first glance, the Stylists seemed to be ideal tenants. Nancy Styler, a world-renowned expert, and Lily Paget, a retired anesthesiologist who was forced to leave his position due to a debilitating neurological disease, appeared to be responsible people who would take good care of the property. However, their seemingly peaceful lives had been upended by a series of setbacks. Lawsuits had depleted their savings, leaving them in financial distress. Trey's illness forced him to resign from his position as chief of staff at a Denver hospital, causing additional hardship. In a desperate attempt to reinvent themselves, they decided to relocate to Aspen, a wealthy and promising destination. Nancy Styler's medical background had led her to consider new possibilities, She had taken Botox and laser treatment courses in the hopes of opening her own spa in Aspen. The presence of wealthy residents, celebrities, and tourists in the area made it an appealing prospect. When they came across Nancy Pfeister's advertisement, it appeared to be the ideal opportunity for them to establish themselves and make connections in their new community. So the stylists became Nancy Pfeister's tenants. The once promising landlord-tenant relationship had mysteriously deteriorated to the point where Nancy Foster died brutally in her own home. The police were now faced with the daunting task of unraveling the events that had led to this tragic outcome, attempting to determine the motives and circumstances surrounding Nancy Foster's disturbing murder. The police's conversation with Trey and Nancy Styler provided a vivid picture of their deteriorating relationship with Nancy Foster. It was clear that their initial enthusiasm for the tendency had faded, resulting in a deep animosity. Nancy Styler described their initial interactions with Nancy Pfeister as positive. They had quickly responded to her ad in October and were warmly welcomed into her home. Nancy Foster even expressed an interest in investing in their new business venture. However, the situation worsened after they moved in. The stylists claimed that Nancy Foster's behavior changed dramatically, becoming demanding and, in their words, akin to being treated like a slave. As a result, when Nancy Pfeister left for Australia in November 2013, the stylists were relieved of her absence. During Nancy Foster's absence, she had asked her friend Kathy to collect rent and care for her Labradoodle. However, by January 2014, tensions had risen. Nancy Pfeister began posting complaints on Facebook, alleging that the stylists had stopped paying their rent and owed her money for utilities. Nancy Styler acknowledged receiving several messages and emails from Nancy Pfeister during this time. In an unexpected turn of events, Nancy Foster informed the Stylers in February 2014 that she was returning 3 months earlier than planned and demanded that they vacate her home before she arrived. When Nancy Pfeister returned home, she discovered that some of the stylists' belongings, including spa equipment for their business, were still stored in her garage. When Nancy Foster returned, she wasted no time in addressing the situation. She entrusted Kathy with delivering a note to Trey outlining her claims that they owed her $14,000 for utilities and property damage and demanding payment. Nancy Foster allegedly threatened to seek a restraining order to keep the Stylers off her property. Although the Stylers questioned the legality of such an action, Nancy Styler's version of events indicates that they went to the house to retrieve their belongings after receiving Nancy Foster's note. Nancy Foster was not present at the time, so they entered the house to collect their belongings, staying until 4 p.m. The next morning, they returned to complete the task, but they still did not encounter Nancy Pfeister. However, during their visit, they noticed Nancy's dog was left alone in the house. Nancy Styler claimed to be unaware of what had happened to Nancy Pfeister, as they had not seen her during their visits to the property. The Nancy Foster case, which involved her complicated relationship with the Stylers and her disappearance, added intrigue to an already enigmatic story. Investigators were intent on determining what happened when Nancy confronted the Stylers about the alleged deaths. The police's initial release of Trey and Nancy Styler following a 12-hour interview raised concerns about their involvement in Nancy Foster's murder. Aside from Kathy's report of a dispute, there was no concrete evidence linking them to the crime. However, the discovery of crucial evidence soon after their release would cast new light on the case. The breakthrough came when a man collecting trash just 100 yards from the motel where the stylists were staying stumbled upon Nancy Foster's belongings. I learned about her murder from the news. He recognized the significance of the discovery and immediately notified the police. After investigating, law enforcement discovered the bag mentioned by the informant, which contained some of Nancy Foster's personal belongings. Intriguingly, the Stylers' Jaguar vehicle registration was found in the same bag, raising questions about why it was in Nancy's possession. But the discoveries did not end there. The police on Earth have an old hammer that they believe is the murder weapon. Testing revealed that the hammer contained traces of Nancy Pfeister's blood. Even more damning, Trey Styler DNA was discovered on the plastic bag containing the hammer. Furthermore, a key to Nancy's closet was discovered just a few yards from the Stylers' motel room. With this new evidence, the police rearrested Trey and Nancy Styler, charging them with first-degree murder. It appeared that the pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, pointing to their role in Nancy Pfeister's brutal death. However, a cloud of uncertainty hung over the case. and the police were open to the possibility of other people being involved or the Stylers being framed. Some of the evidence appeared to be strategically placed, raising suspicions of a hidden hand manipulating the situation. Furthermore, Trey's fragile physical condition, as a result of his neurological ailment, raised concerns about his ability to commit such heinous crimes alone. As the investigation progressed, the search for the full truth expanded to include the possibility that other players were involved in this chilling murder mystery. The arrest of Kathy Carpenter, a friend of Nancy Foster, and a local bank teller, shocked the Aspen community. The investigation took an unexpected turn. As the police investigation progressed, they discovered a number of facts that raised questions about Kathy's involvement in the case, despite her friendship with Nancy Pfister. There were underlying tensions because Kathy felt Nancy treated her more like a personal assistant, even though she had never been compensated for that role. The police suspected Kathy had made a connection with Nancy Styler, sharing stories about their common grievances against Nancy Foster. One particularly disturbing discovery was that Kathy went to Nancy's Alpine Bank safety deposit box and removed $6,000 of Nancy's money, as well as 2 family rings, just one day after discovering her lifeless body. When questioned about this, Kathy stated that Nancy had granted her legal access to the safe deposit box and that she had taken these items with the intent of delivering them to Nancy's daughter, Juliana. Despite the complexities of their relationship, Kathy remained devoted to Nancy and considered her a close friend. She admitted that Nancy could be demanding and frequently gave orders, but she also emphasized the enjoyable times they had together, which fueled the police's suspicions. According to records, Nancy Styler called Kathy 3 or 4 times on February 26, shortly before Nancy Foster's lifeless body was discovered. This communication pattern fueled the investigators' belief that the 3 individuals were somehow connected to Nancy Foster's murder. The twists and turns of Nancy Foster's tragic death continued with a shocking revelation. Just weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Trey, a key figure in the investigation, made an unexpected decision. He approached the judge and expressed his willingness to confess to the crime. Trey's confession resulted in a shocking plea deal in which he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and accepted a 20-year prison sentence. Trey offered to reveal the horrific details of what had happened to Nancy Pfister. However, a critical and fateful aspect of this plea agreement was that Nancy Styler, Trey's wife, would be granted unconditional freedom from all charges relating to Nancy Foster's death. Before the judge, Trey said the words that sealed his fate. "Your Honor, I am guilty." He went on to give a chilling account of what happened that fateful night. Trey confessed that he initially went to Nancy Pfister's house to reason with her. When he left his motel room, his wife was sleeping, unaware of the approaching tragedy. As he entered Nancy Pfister's unlocked home, he discovered her sleeping peacefully in her bedroom. The sight of Nancy sleeping peacefully became unbearable to Trey's already troubled mind. His life was unraveling, plagued by financial ruin, and Nancy Pfister's relentless demands for money, combined with her retention of his spa equipment, left Nancy seemingly unaffected by the chaos, sleeping soundly in her bed. It was a tipping point for Trey, causing him to lose his grip on reality. In a shocking turn of events, Trey described going to the garage and retrieving a trash bag and a hammer. He returned to Nancy's bedroom and brutally bludgeoned her with the hammer, striking her repeatedly until she died, to reduce the evidence of the heinous crime. After Nancy died, he placed the bag over her head and carefully moved her body to a sheet on the floor. She dragged Nancy Pfister's lifeless body into the closet, concealing it from the outside world, tying it with an extension cord tray. Trey's 20-year sentence, as stipulated in his plea agreement, marked the start of a dark chapter for him inside the prison walls. Simultaneously, Nancy Styler, now known as Nancy Styler, now known as Nancy Massey, made a dramatic escape from the shadows of her past. She changed her identity, moved to a different state, and filed for divorce from Trey. However, the narrative took another tragic turn. On August 6, 2015, Trey was discovered dead inside his prison cell, and the cause of death was determined to be suicide. Following her death, Nancy Styler Nancy Masson was able to collect a significant sum of $1 million from a life insurance policy. Share your opinion with us in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A truck driver pulled over to the shoulder of National Route 848 near Bridgend, South Wales on April 6, 2009, barely yards from the highway at the foot of a small valley. He saw an old luggage half hidden by the tall grass. He was intrigued by the suitcase's peculiar shape and positioning. He decided to check it out and was appalled to discover a human hand when he unzipped the bag. The motorist was shocked by the finding and called emergency services right away. On June 19, 1984, Kirsty Wilkinson was born in Coventry, England. 2 children were already being raised by her parents, Catherine and David Wilkinson. The family, including Kirsty's elder sisters, Sonia and Haley, had a close-knit environment that made everyone feel loved and supported. Kirsty and Catherine had a particularly cordial and trustworthy friendship. The family relocated to Bridgend, South Wales when Kirsty became 14. This was a pivotal moment in her life. Her teenage years coincided with the move, and her new school presented additional social and emotional difficulties. Kirsty immediately attracted notice for her attractive beauty and self-assured manner. She started dreaming of a modeling career after being inspired by celebrities she saw in publications. She pictured herself enmeshed in the fashion industry, surrounded by flashes from cameras and the spotlight. The reality, however, was more difficult. Because of the fierce competition in the modeling field, Kirsty found it difficult to launch a successful career. Her only source of income was the occasional amateur picture shoot, which provided little consistency. Kirsty, nevertheless, shone a strong feeling of independence by working a variety of part-time jobs. She avoided depending on her parents for financial support by working as a server, cashier, and even housekeeper from an early age. At the age of 17, Kirsty's situation drastically changed. She had to start working at a Bridgend institution that was well known for its nightlife and adult entertainment due to her growing expenses. For Kirsty, this was more of a need than a choice. Fearing their disapproval, she concealed this part of her life from her family. She told her mother and sisters that she was an administrator at a nearby company. Kirsty attempted to keep this aspect of her life apart from the rest of her life by using the pseudonym Megan to conceal her identity. There were substantial financial advantages to her new position. She was able to pay for personal needs, save a portion of her income, and acquire her own apartment. Kirsty was not proud of her job, though. She battled feelings of humiliation and internal conflict, and she was constantly afraid of being seen. She yearned for a means to move on from that phase of her life and begin over. Kirsty remained connected to her family despite her clandestine work. Unaware of the true cause of her financial independence, her parents viewed her as responsible and goal-oriented. Kirsty persisted in fabricating the appearance of a steady and typical life, hoping that she would eventually be able to abandon her double life and follow her childhood aspirations of stability and normalcy. Paul Grab was born in South Wales in 1983. His early years were characterized by ongoing disputes and unstable finances. Paul felt unwelcome from a young age because his parents were constantly fighting and regularly neglected their son. Paul exhibited problematic conduct, frequently missing school and arguing with students and teachers. His parents tried unsuccessfully to reprimand him because of his subpar academic achievement. Paul started acting more aggressively by the time he was a teenager. He was openly disrespectful to professors and often got into confrontations. But he eventually dropped out of school, leaving his education unfinished, as his reputation at school deteriorated. Paul became interested in illegal substances about this time. His initial experiments with moderate narcotics gradually progressed to more serious addictions, which made him more hostile and alone. Paul began working in escort services when he was 18 in order to pay for his vices. He was willing to work for both men and women. Although it was risky, this line of employment became his main source of revenue. Paul experienced humiliation, violence, and threats, which fueled his rage and feeling of unfairness. He was also drawn into the criminal underworld by this path, where he made contacts that allowed him to carry on with his destructive way of life. One significant instance of Paul's increasingly antagonistic behavior was a fight with a neighbor, whom he accused of causing damage to his vehicle. The woman was forced to leave the neighborhood after Paul threatened her and even attacked her with a bat. Because of the frequent occurrence of such instances, many members of his community shunned him. He was leading a lonely and disorderly life by the time he met Kirsty in 2004. Escort work, drug abuse, and an inclination toward violence had taken center stage in his life. His manipulative habits and problems controlling his wrath frequently hurt others around him. Kirsty had no idea how his tumultuous background would have a devastating impact on her own life when she first met Paul. Paul Grabbett and Kirsty Wilkinson met in 2004 while attending a party in one of Bridgeton's nightclubs. Both Kirsty and Paul, who were 20 and 21 years old respectively, were going through difficult times. Kirsty was still employed at a place, while Paul was heavily addicted to drugs and relied on sporadic revenue from escort services. She kept secrets from her family. Mutual attraction served as the foundation for the bond that grew between them in spite of their differences. Their initial encounter was entirely fortuitous. They were introduced by mutual acquaintances during the boisterous party. Paul's self-assurance drew Kirsty in, and her attractiveness and endearing grin enthralled him. Although they spent the evening together, no meaningful commitments were made. They didn't have a close relationship after that night, although they did communicate periodically. For Kirsty, it was only a brief phase in her life that held no hope of lasting change. 3 years after their first meeting, their relationship was revived at the end of 2007. Unusual circumstances led to Paul, a client, visiting the same place where Kirsty worked. Paul recognized her and went to talk to her, even though she was using her pseudonym Megan. It started off awkwardly but quickly became a comfortable conversation. Paul proposed they get together outside of work and that he had been thinking about her a lot since they first met. Their relationship started to grow quickly after that. They began to spend more time together, sharing personal tales and taking walks. Kirsty, who had concealed her work life from her loved ones, found in Paul someone who appeared to comprehend and accept her without passing judgment. Paul, on the other hand, concealed the problematic elements of his past by projecting charm and confidence. Soon after, Kirsty began to think that Paul might be her prince, someone who might help her change her life. His desire to change his life and settle down to establish a family impressed her. She believed they had a common understanding, which gave her hope that things might become better in her life. Paul deftly fueled this romantic illusion by frequently bragging about his purported accomplishments, which included previous positions as a race car driver, mechanic, and even a dancer. But even though their relationship seemed harmonious on the surface, it was based on lies. Paul was aware of Kirsty's occupation from the beginning, but he kept his true intentions from her. She was not only a possible love interest, but also a source of financial security. However, Kirsty started confiding in Paul more than she had in anybody else because she believed that their relationship was genuine. A few weeks after getting back in touch with Paul, Kirsty stunned her mother Catherine by announcing her engagement in December 2007. Kirsty claimed that Paul had asked her to marry him and she had accepted without question. In spite of her secret existence, Kirsty felt she had discovered the guy of her dreams, someone who would accept her for who she was. Her family was completely unaware of Paul's existence, so they were all taken aback by the news. Catherine voiced her worries right away. She believed Kirsty didn't know Paul well enough and that the relationship was progressing too soon. In order to give her daughter more time to comprehend Paul's personality and goals, she advised her to postpone the wedding. Kirsty insisted on delaying the ceremony for at least a few months, despite Catherine's suggestion. 5 weeks after announcing their engagement, she and Paul had already decided on a date in February 2008. The family's initial encounter with Paul only made their worries worse. He left a bad impression when Kirsty took him home. Paul was unkempt, wore informal clothing, and showed a marked lack of deference when interacting with Kirsty's parents. Red flags were triggered by his life stories. None of his claims that he had experience as a mechanic, race car driver, or even a dancer could be verified. Paul seemed to exaggerate his accomplishments in an attempt to impress them, but his manner and tone made Kirsty's family uncomfortable. Kirsty's parents, David and Catherine, attempted to talk her out of becoming involved too soon. They noted that their connection was moving too fast and that Paul didn't appear trustworthy. Sonia, Kirsty's older sister, expressed her worries as well, saying that Paul seemed manipulating. She was convinced that Paul was her only hope for a happy future, even if they tried to persuade her otherwise. From an early age, Kirsty had always been romantic and dreamy. She had big plans for a wedding and a big family. She felt empty from her previous way of life and believed that marrying Paul would start a new chapter in her life. She disregarded all the cautions, since she was determined to pursue her ambition. She even persuaded herself that her loved ones were just unable of comprehending her emotions. Kirsty's family decided to support her on her wedding day, in spite of their misgivings. The event was held in February of 2008. Her sisters and parents were there, but their grins belied their discomfort. In contrast, Paul seemed delighted and assured. Although it was the day Kirsty's wishes came true, her family saw it as the beginning of her increasing alienation. They believed she was ignoring the alarming indicators that would eventually have disastrous results. Kirsty and Paul started their life together at her Bridgend apartment, following their February 2008 wedding. Paul established his own regulations right away, which swiftly developed into total authority. Without consulting Kirsty, he moved into her house and took over her finances right away. Paul demanded access to her bank account, saying it was essential to better manage their finances. Kirsty didn't protest, fully engrossed in her love vision. It quickly became clear that Paul had no desire to improve their mutual well-being. He didn't try to get a job and stayed at home most of the time, while Kirsty kept working to provide for them both. With addition, Paul started meddling with her work life. He advised her to take on additional clients in order to boost their revenue, rather than discouraging her work. Without considering Kirsty's feelings or welfare, he saw this as a means of paying their mounting bills. Paul had power over more than just words. Under the pretense of protecting her, he started going to work with Kirsty to keep an eye on her schedule and make sure she complied with his requests. He gradually began using the internet to find her new customers. Paul advertised Kirsty's services by creating numerous accounts on different platforms. Her workload thus increased in difficulty. She began meeting clients at home in addition to working shifts at the company. Kirsty soon found herself in a scenario that was emotionally damaging. She had always envisioned quitting her job, beginning a new life, and raising a family. But under Paul's influence, those aspirations appeared unreachable. Paul persuaded her that this was the best way to preserve their relationship and financial security, even if she was reluctant to continue. He used her love for him and her sense of duty as leverage. Paul had authority over more than just money. He also started meddling with her private affairs. He examined her phone, demanded answers for everything she did, and prohibited her from talking to certain of her friends. He maintained that their relationship was negatively impacted by a few of them. Over time, Kirsty found herself alone, with no one to confide in or support. Paul's efforts to erode Kirsty's trust were among the first indications of his manipulative tendencies. He made remarks about how she looked, highlighting what he saw as her shortcomings, and he gave her the impression that she couldn't be successful without him. She became more and more reliant on him as a result of these comments, which damaged her sense of self. Kirsty's sense of insecurity was exacerbated by Paul's severe mood swings, which ranged from kindness and concern to annoyance and aggressiveness. Paul's assertiveness increased over time. Under the guise of varying their relationship, he started bringing people into their private lives. Despite Kirsty's strong opposition to this notion, she reluctantly accepted in order to prevent strife. But these circumstances just made her inner agony worse. She started to feel as if she no longer owned her life or her body. Kirsty made an effort to keep up the illusion of a typical family life, but she was overcome with anxiety and uncertainty on the inside. Paul completely ignored her needs and feelings as he maintained his domination. She kept a journal in which she often wrote down her thoughts, but she was not strong enough to resist Paul's increasing dominance. She had to constantly fight to maintain what little independence she still had, while dealing with Paul's incessant pressure and manipulation. Paul's domineering actions gradually turned into outright hostility. A few months after the wedding, the first physical altercations had place. One night, Paul got into a fight with Kirsty because she hadn't made enough money, and he ended up pushing and hitting her in Kirsty's place. Although it was a startling event, Paul immediately expressed regret and vowed that it would never occur again, but his excuses were only short-lived. These episodes quickly got more frequent and more severe. Paul started acting aggressively to subdue Kirsty's will. He would go from threats to physical acts when she didn't comply with his demands. When Kirsty tried to express her wish to quit her employment at the establishment, for example, Paul angrily interrupted her, called her ungrateful, and then hit her. He increased his exertion, further limiting her autonomy into decision-making. Catherine, Kirsty's mom, started to suspect that her daughter was not happy in her marriage. She made an effort to speak openly with her, but Kirsty either sidestepped the subject or changed the subject, recognizing danger. Paul might seriously jeopardize her safety. Catherine cautioned her, but Kirsty brushed these worries aside, believing that with patience she could make things better. Although Kirsty's inner misgivings increased, she held on to the notion that things may get better. According to her journal entries, she was aware of how toxic her marriage was, but she was afraid of what might happen and lacked the courage to leave. She was stuck in a relationship that was gradually undermining her sense of self because of guilt feelings and her psychological reliance on Paul. Kirsty and Paul made the decision to go out with friends to a Swansea nightclub on March 28, 2009. As was not unusual for them, they drank wine and other narcotics throughout the night. Witnesses reported that the pair experienced tense periods that occasionally resulted in disputes. While Kirsty seemed to be avoiding confrontation, Paul seemed agitated. After a furious disagreement at midnight, Paul left the party and went home by himself, leaving Kirsty and their friends. Kirsty chose to stay and spend the rest of the evening with her friends rather than immediately following him. They then reported that she seemed worn out and depressed, but made an effort to hide her feelings. Kirsty hired a cab late that evening to drive her home. Later, the cabbie said that after dropping her off at the residence, she entered with assurance. She was last seen alive at this point. Paul informed Kirsty's mother, Catherine, the next day that his wife had departed early that morning, purportedly taking money and some possessions. He said he was asleep and hadn't heard anything. Kirsty might have gone to visit another man, Paul added, since Kirsty had left her personal belongings and bank cards behind, a strange move for someone preparing to start over. Catherine thought his explanation was fishy. When it was discovered that Kirsty had tried to call emergency services throughout the night but the call was dropped because of a weak signal, another troubling detail emerged. Police later learned that neighbors claimed to have heard muffled screams and the sounds of a struggle about the time Kirsty supposedly left. Her relatives and investigators suspected foul play because of these characteristics and the absence of evidence indicating she went voluntarily. The police started an inquiry as soon as Kirsty was reported missing. Her husband, Paul Grab, was the main suspect. Paul stated that he had been asleep during the night and discovered the following morning that Kirsty had grabbed a few items and gone, as his actions had caused alarm from the beginning. His account of what happened, however, was not consistent with the facts. Kirsty had left behind her bank cards and other significant personal belongings, which ran counter to the notion that she had departed on purpose. When police first searched their house, they discovered some unusual modifications. The carpet that had been in the living room was gone, and a portion of the ceiling had recently been painted. Kirsty had wanted to redecorate, according to Paul's explanation, but that didn't seem reasonable. During the night, neighbors reported hearing muffled cries, sounds of a fight, and a bang that sounded like the movement of a heavy object. At the time, no one called the police, figuring it was simply a domestic dispute. Kirsty's unsuccessful attempt to contact emergency services the night she vanished provided a vital clue. Although investigators concluded that the call was cut off, the fact that she attempted to contact for assistance indicated that she was in danger. This increased suspicions of Paul's involvement even more, as did the neighbors' statements. The investigation took a sad turn on April 6, 2009. A suitcase was discovered in a roadside ditch by a truck driver who had stopped on the shoulder of the A48 close to Bridgend. He was drawn to the item's peculiar appearance. He found a human hand when he opened the suitcase. He called the police right away, horrified. Officers discovered a woman's body inside the suitcase when they got there. Kirsty Wilkinson was later identified by experts as the victim. Kirsty had been seriously injured according to a physical examination. She had multiple bruises and scratches on her body, and her jaw and nose were shattered. She passed away as a result of a traumatic brain injury brought on by many head injuries. She also had evidence of strangulation, which suggests that someone tried to suffocate her during the fight before being abandoned in the ditch. Investigators discovered that her body had been transported from another area. Paul was taken into custody by authorities that same day. He denied any involvement during questioning, saying he was unaware of Kirsty's movements after she departed, but his tense manner suggested that he was not involved at all. Additionally, investigators found that Paul attended a massage parlor and took out cash using Kirsty's bank card the day after she vanished, all of which seemed extremely suspect given the circumstances. The terrible chronology of the crime was was made clear by forensic evidence and testimonies. A dispute between Kirsty and Paul occurred the night before she vanished. Paul assaulted her, trying to choke her and hitting her several times. Paul brought Kirsty's body to the living room after she passed away, and he struggled to pack it in a bag because of how big she was. Without the required equipment, Paul gave up on his initial plan to dismember it. Finally, he pushed her body into the suitcase and carried it to a ditch on the side of the road, where he dumped it. Later, bloodstains were discovered in Kirsty's house, which Paul had attempted in vain to clean. Splatter marks on the ceiling were found to be hidden by paint stains. Together with witness statements and Paul's actions, these pieces of evidence proved to be essential in establishing his guilt. The charges against Paul were strengthened by Kirsty's journal entries, which also showed her dread of him and her wish to flee. Early in 2010, Paul Grabbitt's trial got underway. Based on police-gathered evidence and witness accounts, prosecutors provided a thorough chronology of the events. One of the most important pieces of evidence was the bloodstains in the living room, which Paul tried to hide by removing the carpet and repainting the ceiling. The blood matched Kirsty's, according to forensic specialists, and suggested a severe altercation. Severe aggression was seen in her physical injuries. Neighbors and other witnesses claimed to have heard muffled cries coming from the residence and the sounds of a struggle. A cab driver acknowledged that he dropped Kirsty off at her house the night she vanished, just before she passed away. Records of Kirsty's unsuccessful attempt to contact emergency services owing to a bad signal were produced by the police. Paul's use of Kirsty's bank card for purchases, such as cash withdrawals and visits to a massage parlor following her passing, was another crucial piece of evidence. Kirsty's journal entries were read out loud during the trial. She talked about how she was afraid of Paul because of his aggressiveness and cunning. These documents depicted a life of financial exploitation, intimidation, and control. The prosecution focused on how Paul controlled Kirsty's life while ignoring her security and welfare. Paul denied any misconduct, asserting that Kirsty left their house on her own volition and implying that an unidentified someone was responsible for her passing. Evidence and witness accounts, however, refuted his story. Investigators also discovered that Paul had tried to portray himself as a laid-back husband by claiming that Kirsty had cheated on him with another man. Paul was found guilty of the crime by the jury following a protracted trial. The judge emphasized Paul's total lack of regret, the act's extraordinary cruelty, and its self-serving motivations. Paul Grabbitt was given a life sentence with a minimum of 19 years in prison on February 4, 2010. Kirsty's family was somewhat relieved by the sentence, but it was insufficient to make up for their terrible loss. Kirsty's family was unaware of certain aspects of her life until the trial. They felt that they could have saved themselves from the disaster, and they were overcome with anguish and shame. In addition to marking the end of the case, the hearing served as a sobering reminder of the destructive power of dysfunctional relationships and control. The Wilkinson family suffered severe emotional and psychological damage following Kirsty's passing. Catherine, her mother, battled a persistent sense of guilt. All of the cautions she had given Kirsty, the statements her daughter had disregarded, and her instinct that Paul posed a threat to her were all repeated in her thoughts. She was overcome by these ideas, which made the loss much more painful. David, Kirsty's father, became reclusive and avoided talking about the catastrophe. Their family's cohesiveness was destroyed when they lost their youngest daughter. Haley, Kirsty's older sister, was deeply impacted by her passing. Since the two had always been close, Haley found it difficult to fill the vacuum created by the loss. Haley tried to numb the pain by drinking because she was unable to handle the mounting weight of her depression and powerlessness. Haley died at the age of 31 from alcohol poisoning 5 years after Kirsty did. Kirsty's other sister, Sonia, lost yet another daughter as a result of this second tragedy, which dealt the Wilkinson family yet another painful blow. The tragedy served as a sobering reminder of how crucial it is to keep loved ones safe. Despite her own profound sadness, she made an effort to help her parents. No verdict or punishment could mend the wound that the Wilkinson family was left with. Their lives were ruined by the tragedy, which left a scar they would never be able to shake. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. 58-year-old Christy Marks, a successful, professional, and loving mother, walked out of her house on the evening of October 24, 2009, feeling hopeful. She was traveling to re-establish contact with her 20-year-old daughter Taylor, whom Christy had adopted years prior. Taylor had called earlier that day to beg Christy to come get her from the home of her boyfriend Brian. This request was an unanticipated favor, following a protracted period of hostility between them. Around 7:00 p.m., Christy arrived to Brian's residence. The Akron, Ohio area was notorious for its high crime rate and overall gloom. Christy parked her car, went to the door, and knocked in spite of her fears. When Taylor responded, Christy, unable to control her happiness, gave her a hug. There didn't appear to be any conflict between them. Brian soon followed, escorting the two women back to Christy's vehicle. Although the location itself made Christy uncomfortable, everything appeared regular to her. Things took a horrifying turn as they approached the automobile. Suddenly, a man with a knife came behind them. The assault was vicious and quick. Before Christy could protect herself, she was hit several times in the face and chest. Then she fell to the floor. After screaming, Taylor snatched up her phone and dialed 911. She can be heard begging for assistance on the recording of the call, stating that her mother had been attacked while Taylor was speaking with the dispatcher. She handed the phone to Brian, who gave their location and recounted the events, saying the assailant had run away. He spoke in an eerily serene tone, devoid of the intensity one might anticipate from someone who had just witnessed such a horrific incident. Paramedics showed up in a matter of minutes. Christy was critically ill, yet still alive. After being taken to the hospital, medical professionals put forth endless effort to save her life. Shortly after their arrival, Christy Marks was declared dead, despite their best attempts. Multiple stab wounds administered with frightening intensity at the scene were the main cause of death. Law enforcement immediately identified a number of irregularities. Near the scene of the attack, Christy's purse, which held her paperwork, cash, keys, and other belongings, was discovered undamaged. This particular feature ran counter to the usual heist pattern. A bloodied knife, which was thought to be the weapon used, was also found in bushes close by. These results cast doubt on the witnesses' testimonies and highlighted the prospect of more complex motivations for the crime. Taylor, the police started questioning everyone. Accounts from Brian and his friend Troy, who was inside the house when it was attacked, were conflicting and erratic. Taylor stated that she had only seen the attacker's outline, identifying a person dressed in a flannel shirt and red sneakers. Brian claimed that while battling the attacker, he attempted to step in and even got hurt. But Troy denied ever leaving the house and said he didn't see anything. Investigators soon had suspicions that none of them were telling the truth despite their assertions. Blood trails and the location of the weapon were among the evidence discovered at the scene that pointed to a staged crime. Authorities thought the incident was well planned rather than a chance occurrence. Detectives were under constant observation during the first night of the investigation, and they were left with one unanswered question. Who among those present knew the truth, and why would someone target Christy? On March 29, 1989, Taylor Marks was born. Immediately after her birth, her biological mother made the decision to place her in foster care, placing the child in the custody of the adoption system. Although Taylor was the only member of her original family placed in foster care, little is known about them other than the fact that she had at least one elder sibling. This was the start of a new chapter in her life, one that ultimately gave love and compassion despite its difficult beginning. A few months later, Bruce and Christy Marks welcomed Taylor into their family. Due to their inability to conceive, the couple had long wished to become parents. They knew Taylor was destined to be a member of their family the moment they laid eyes on her. The Marks family was financially secure at the time. Bruce was a senior employee of a large telecom business, and Christy, who was well known for her ability to stay organized, ran the home and supported their family. Taylor was surrounded by love from their huge and close-knit extended family. She was surrounded by supportive and caring relatives, including grandparents, aunts, uncles, and numerous cousins. Raising Taylor was very important to Bruce and Christy. She enrolled in dance courses, went to exclusive private schools, and engaged in other extracurricular activities. Opportunities that many of her peers did not have were abundant in her life. But Taylor had a special relationship with Bruce. Family friends said that Bruce was her hero. Dad always gave her what she wanted and supported her without conditions. However, she had a different relationship with Christy. Christy was more realistic, demanding, and severe. Although Taylor's early years were not significantly impacted by these disparities in parenting, tensions started to surface as she grew older. Taylor had growing parental supervision and expectations during her adolescence, which frequently led to arguments. Growing arguments were the backdrop against which the family dynamic started to erode. Christy and Bruce had marital problems that ultimately resulted in their divorce when Taylor was about 10 years old. Taylor claims that she was emotionally impacted by her parents' divorce. She believed that Christy started to vent her annoyances on her, which made their relationship even more strained. At the age of 13, Taylor's life took a significant turn in 2002. Bruce went into a diabetic coma and died unexpectedly. Taylor suffered a terrible loss at his passing, losing not just her father but also her most dependable emotional support system. Her grandfather, with whom she was also quite close, also died soon after. Taylor suffered severe emotional injuries as a result of these back-to-back defeats. Christy acquired a sizable estate, including a sizable chunk of money, after Bruce passed away. In the hopes that a change of scenery would give her and Taylor a new beginning, she utilized a portion of the money to buy a new house in Akron, Ohio. But Taylor's emotional condition was getting worse. She became more reclusive. Her disagreements with Christy grew more heated, and her academic performance declined. Although Christy made an effort to help her daughter, her strategies frequently came across as unduly restrictive. She made an effort to make up for Bruce's passing by giving Taylor material luxuries, frequently going above and above to meet all of her needs and more. The emotional bond between them, though, kept deteriorating. One day, Christy hoped, her daughter will assume responsibilities, complete her studies, and continue the family tradition. However, Taylor was uninterested in these ideas and preferred to fantasize rather than defying what she perceived to be imposed expectations. Taylor's desire for independence ran counter to her mother's expectations as she approached adolescence. Conflicts started to escalate after this, and they only became worse over time. For Taylor, her mother was a continual source of stress. Tensions increased with every year that went by. Christy made an effort to guide Taylor in the way she thought was best by enforcing stringent regulations. Her daughter's falling grades, lack of concentration in class, and seeming disregard for her future caused her to worry more and more. However, Taylor's urge to rebel was fueled by her perception that her mother was trying to control her life. The emotional distance between Taylor and Christy only grew as a result of her incessant criticism of Taylor's looks, wardrobe, and friend choices. The years in high school were especially difficult. Taylor started abusing her mother's rights after gaining access to them. She disregarded Christy's attempts to maintain discipline, preferring to hang out with friends over studying. Christy attempted a number of strategies to help her daughter, but they simply made the gap wider. Taylor's high school graduation in 2008 was a significant turning point. Taylor had little interest in going to college, even if Christy was eager to give her the money and the chance to go any college. Taylor finally enrolled at an Akron university after Christy encouraged him to at least try, but Taylor left for Christy after only 1 month of her first semester. This choice was a significant setback, signifying the widening gap between their aspirations for Taylor's future. Christy made the decision to adopt a more assertive stance after realizing that persuasion was failing. She threatened to leave the house unless Taylor found a job and began to support herself. In America, where young adults are urged to assume responsibility for their life once they reach maturity, this was a typical expectation. But Taylor interpreted her mother's remarks as cruelty and a threat rather than as inspiration, which exacerbated their disagreement. When Taylor met 21-year-old Brian Smith, who had a reputation as a bad kid, in May 2009, things became even more heated. Along with his mother and sister, Brian resided in a low-income area of the city. Taylor was immediately attracted to him because she saw in Brian an opportunity to break free from her mother's authority. However, some who knew Brian said he had a fiery temper and a need to control others in relationships. Stop, Taylor. Christy was adamantly against the partnership. In addition to Brian's actions, she was worried about the impact he would have on her kid. Christy tried to keep Taylor away from Brian, even preventing him from visiting their house. but these acts just strengthened Taylor's determination. Soon after, Taylor left her mother's house, packed her things, and moved in with Brian. At first, their relationship appeared promising, but it didn't take long for Brian to start acting aggressively and controllingly. Thus, life with Brian was far from the perfect picture Taylor had envisioned. Taylor experienced control, envy, and angry outbursts frequently. Despite this, she refused to go back home because she believed that doing so would be an admission of failure. Christy was worried about her daughter and kept helping, in the hopes that her daughter would learn from her mistakes. She kept in touch and bought necessities for Taylor. When Christy offered Taylor a lifeline, their tension reached a breaking point. She was allowed to return home as long as she found employment or went back to school. Christy went so far as to offer her more assistance, including a job at her company, an apartment, and a car. However, Taylor didn't seem really interested in these chances. She and Brian's turbulent relationship persisted, in spite of the growing difficulties. Christy clung to the hope that Taylor would eventually realize her mistakes. One day, she thought, her daughter would come home and be more responsible. Regretfully, this dream would never materialize, and the actions that would ultimately result in a fatal outcome were put in motion by the widening gap in their relationship, which was exacerbated over time. Taylor felt that her long-awaited liberation began when she moved into Brian's house, but that liberty soon gave way to a number of limitations. She had no idea what life with Brian would be like. He kept a close eye on every part of her life and enforced stringent standards. Taylor, who was used to a certain amount of ease and autonomy, was thrust into a situation where she was expected to do anything Brian asked of her. Brian quickly had complete control over Taylor. He kept a close eye on her whereabouts, checked her phone, and read her messages. Even her conversations with Christy became contentious. Taylor was persuaded by Brian that her mother was only attempting to control her and keep her from living her life as she saw fit. Christy kept reaching out, but his remarks widened the already widening gap between them. Taylor was in total seclusion in Brian's house, but she was determined to maintain communication. By presenting himself as the only one who genuinely understood her, Brian not only limited her social circle but also played with her emotions. He acted aggressively during arguments, threatening people and smashing things. Demands for complete fealty and continual reminders of her reliance on him frequently followed his tantrums. The fact that Brian's mother, Tammy, decided not to step in and essentially encouraged his actions made matters more problematic. By serving as a watcher while Brian wasn't present, his younger sister also contributed to keeping Taylor under control. Because of this, Taylor's every action was constantly watched. Another important element in Taylor's relationship with Brian was her financial connections to her mother. Brian was determined to keep things under control because he was aware of Christy's riches and Taylor's possible inheritance. He further strained their relationship by often reinforcing the notion that her mother was the cause of all her issues. Taylor started avoiding her mother as a result of Brian's influence, and even when Christy came to assist her daughter, Brian continued to act contemptuously and distantly. He insisted that they could manage things independently and dissuaded Taylor from accepting her mother's help. Christy persisted in providing for Taylor in spite of Brian's efforts, purchasing her essentials and pressing her to return home. The conflict between Taylor, Brian, and Christy had escalated to a breaking point by the summer of 2009. Taylor had lived with Brian for months and was now totally reliant on his influence. In the midst of growing aggressiveness and control, a concept emerged that at first glance appeared unrealistic, but quickly developed into a detailed strategy. Financial incentives, mutual discontent, and growing pressure all contributed to this notion. In order to obtain access to Christy's assets, it was intended to permanently remove her. For Taylor, this appeared to be a means of becoming financially independent and cutting the final links that bound her to her mother. It gave Brian the chance to firmly establish his dominance over Taylor and take advantage of her wealth to better his own situation. Within their close circle, the notion of committing a crime started to circulate. Troy Purdy, a 19-year-old buddy of Brian's who often came to their house, joined in on these conversations. Younger and more susceptible, Troy was viewed as a perfect fit for the scheme. At first, the discussions were presented as jokes or made-up situations, but they grew more somber over time. With meticulous attention to every detail, the planning process moved slowly forward. Brian and Taylor discussed ways to make the crime appear to be a random attack or robbery. They concluded that rather than indicating a planned crime, the evidence found at the scene should suggest an act of spontaneous hostility. Taylor and Brian were not directly involved in the incident because Troy was selected to perform the act. Troy's commitment to Brian served as the foundation for his involvement. He didn't dispute the strategy, and he respected Brian. Troy was promised $5,000 in exchange for his role. Taylor anticipated receiving this sum from her inheritance after the court proceedings were concluded. The weapon was chosen with particular care. Taylor claims that Tammy, Brian's mother, even bought a knife for the scheme, but it was later determined that its size and weight made it inappropriate. Finally, Troy took it upon himself to locate a suitable weapon. He picked a small, lightweight knife that was convenient to carry and hide. Studying Christie's routines was an essential component of the preparation process. They knew that Christie frequently came to see Taylor at Brian's residence, which left her susceptible because she typically arrived alone herself, thinking she was just picking up her daughter. This information was included in the plan. The attack was supposed to happen while Christie was leaving the house or close to her car when she arrived at the residence. Taylor took the last step to make sure everything went according to plan just before everything was put into action. She wanted to return home, so she called her mother and asked her to come get her. The purpose of this phone contact was to emotionally disarm Christie, allowing her to feel relieved and letting her guard down during the conversations. Taylor didn't hesitate. Troy claims that in addition to actively participating in the planning, she had a strong will to see it through to completion. Even though she and her mother had a tense relationship, this was an extreme move. Taylor used her desire to get away from her mother's control and years of bitterness as justifications for her engagement. While this was going on, Brian led the process and persuaded Taylor that this was the only way to solve her issues. Everything was prepared by the evening of October 24, 2009. Taylor stayed composed and concentrated, thinking that this was the best way to go, even though she knew the plan was progressing from theory to action. This day appeared to be the beginning of Christie and her daughter's reconciliation. It signaled what Taylor and Brian perceived as the start of a new phase in their lives. For Christie Marks, October 24, 2009 started off as an ordinary day but ended tragically. Taylor wanted to come home for Christie, she told her mother over the phone that night. This surprise call was a happy moment. She saw it as a chance to reestablish a relationship with her daughter after months of conflict. Unaware that she was entering a carefully orchestrated crime, she hastily packed her belongings, got into her car, and drove to Brian's residence. Christie showed up at about 7:00 p.m. After parking close to the house, she made her way to the front door. It seemed as if this was the first step toward reconciliation as Taylor smiled and gave her a hug. Brian watched the event from behind as they left the house. Troy remained inside as intended, to avoid raising any red flags. Brian followed a little behind, as if escorting Christie and Taylor as they started toward the car. Everything changed in a second, even though it seemed like a typical interaction. The incident started abruptly and without warning, when Troy came out of the home with the knife as the two women got closer to the car. Christie didn't have time to respond. Troy repeatedly hit her in the face and chest. She had little time to defend herself because the attack was so quick and vicious. After being stabbed more than 10 times, Christie collapsed to the ground. There was no robbery here. It was a deliberate act of violence with the goal of killing her. Taylor was standing close by, observing the assault. She later said that her fear of Troy was the reason she did nothing. Surveillance film that was later found, however, revealed no indications of panic or concern on her behalf. Brian likewise did nothing to stop Troy, claiming that his only responsibility was to safeguard the women. After the incident was ended, Taylor grabbed her phone and dialed 911. She pleaded for an ambulance to be sent right away, and her voice sounded stressed, but Brian quickly took over the phone and took on the coordinator's position, giving the dispatcher information about the location and the kind of help that was required. Law enforcement officials who subsequently analyzed the call were suspicious of his emotionless and composed voice. Troy left the knife in a nearby bush after finishing the attack and ran away. He later stated that his actions were motivated by mental turmoil, but the evidence indicated otherwise. After meticulous planning, Christie was taken to the hospital, but the medical staff was unable to rescue her. She died from several stab wounds that were clearly caused in a fit of rage after Christy Marks' untimely death. The inquiry got underway right away. Only a few minutes after the emergency services call, police showed up on the site. Doubt was quickly aroused by the evidence they discovered, which included a knife in the bushes, Christy's purse with everything she owned still in it, and the lack of any indications of robbery. The specifics did not fit the premise of a random attack. Questioning Taylor, Brian, and Troy was the first thing the detectives did. To exclude any possibility of collaboration, each were interviewed independently, but their explanations were erratic and unpersuasive. Inconsistencies in their statements were promptly discovered by the police. Surveillance footage taken close to the crime scene provided the crucial piece of evidence. Taylor and Brian were seen on camera standing close by when Troy assaulted Christy. Neither of them attempted to step in. These recordings turned out to be a pivotal moment. Equipped with this proof, investigators went back to question the suspects. Troy was the first to confess under the weight of the evidence. He said Taylor was the mastermind behind the plan and acknowledged that the attack had been planned. Troy claims that she had presented the concept to him and Brian, offering a monetary incentive from the estate she would inherit upon her mother's passing. Troy disclosed that he was in charge of carrying out the attack, while Brian was in charge of fabricating an alibi by making it seem like a robbery. Additionally, Troy said that he had purposefully caused minor injuries to Brian in order to add credibility to the fictitious situation. His admission totally refuted Taylor's earlier assertion that the attack was an isolated incident. Brian also changed his story after hearing Troy's confession. He confirmed Troy's claim that Taylor had started the scheme. Brian, however, denied taking part in the attack, saying that although he disapproved of it, he felt helpless to stop Taylor and Troy. Additionally, he maintained that he didn't know the entire strategy until the very last minute. However, this appeared to be an effort to minimize his role. Taylor first denied her involvement, despite growing evidence and accusations, but her account of what happened got more and more erratic. According to investigators, she started contradicting herself, and her actions indicated that she was trying to conceal the truth. Ultimately, as the evidence mounted, Taylor acknowledged talking to Brian and Troy about the plot. Numerous information that were discovered during the inquiry demonstrated how intentional the crime was. Everything was carefully planned by the players, including the weapon selection and the fabrication of injuries. Both Troy and Brian's stated money motivation turned into a key element of the prosecution's case. Taylor said that one of the main reasons behind her choice was her continuous disagreement with her mother. She did, however, assert that she had not expected the situation to worsen to such a horrible conclusion. Police had a complete picture of what had happened within 5 hours after the crime. In relation to Christy Marks' death, Troy Purdy, Brian Smith, and Taylor Marks were taken into custody and charged. However, this marked the end of the investigation's first phase. The court would decide their degrees of guilt and impose sentences, and the legal process was only getting started. In late 2009, the trial for Christy Marks' crime got underway. Because of the savagery of the crime and the involvement of those close to the victim, the defendants were under intense public scrutiny. A plethora of evidence, including camera recordings and witness statements, served as the foundation for the prosecution's case. The security film, which showed Taylor and Brian watching and doing nothing to stop the attack on Christy, was the strongest piece of evidence. Furthermore, a key component of the case was Troy's confession, which described the conspiracy and his involvement in the crime. Additionally, Taylor's phone was used by investigators to exhibit text messages in which she talked about her tense relationship with her mother and stated that she wanted to be free of her. Evidence of the sizable inheritance Taylor anticipated receiving following Christy's passing provided more credence for the financial motivation. It was disclosed during the trial that Christy has substantial assets, including as a business, real properties, and sizable savings. Taylor, Brian, and Troy's defense lawyers aimed to lessen their client's guilt. According to Taylor's defense, she was heavily influenced by Brian and lacked the independence to act on her own. According to her attorney, she was susceptible to manipulation because of the emotional instability brought on by the death of her father and the pressure from her mother. Brian, however, denied being directly involved in the crime. He didn't know about the plan until the attack happened, according to his lawyer, and Buka paralyzed him so he couldn't stop it. Troy tried to somewhat alter his story during the trial, stating that he was under pressure from Brian to do so, even though he had already confessed. Troy admitted his guilt and testified against the other defendants in exchange for a plea agreement with the prosecution. Instead of facing the death penalty, he was given a life sentence without the prospect of release. Taylor also entered a guilty plea after realizing how bleak her circumstances were. She made a heartfelt statement throughout the hearings, expressing regret for what she had done. She described how she became involved in the crime as a result of her disputes with her mother and Brian's influence. Prosecutors countered that she was intentionally and strategically involved. When faced with indisputable proof, Brian, on the other hand, finally acknowledged his role after first denying it. The court saw this as an attempt to minimize his responsibility, notwithstanding his insistence that his involvement was small and that he had not intended for the crime to occur. Taylor Marks and Brian Smith were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy by the court in 2010. They were both given life sentences, without the chance of release. Although Taylor apologized for what she had done, her assertion that she had lost control was interpreted as an effort to lessen the severity of her punishment. Troy Purdy was also sentenced to life in prison as part of his plea agreement, but his actions while inside ultimately came to light. He was accused of having a weapon within the prison in 2015, which cast doubt on his capacity for change. The announcement of the penalties permanently altered the lives of all those engaged in the catastrophe. In addition to losing a mother, Christy Marks' family also lost a daughter who participated in her demise. The narrative turned into a sad lesson of how even the closest relationships may be destroyed by rash actions and personal disagreements. Taylor was committed to a women's penitentiary prison in Ohio and given a life sentence without the possibility of release. She avoided interacting with the media and other prisoners throughout her first few years behind bars. But in 2021, Taylor spoke about her case in an interview with a television show. Taylor acknowledged the seriousness of her acts during the interview, but she persisted in using her mental instability and her disagreement with her mother as excuses for her choices. Even though Taylor had previously apologized in court, she continued to criticize her mother, calling her harsh and unsupportive following the loss of her father. She added that she hoped to have her case evaluated and be given the opportunity to live freely in the future. Her remarks caused controversy since many people believed they showed a lack of sincere regret. Taylor currently works at the prison and takes part in rehabilitation programs during the day. Her professed repentance is still divisive. While some perceive her statements as an attempt to find purpose in life while incarcerated, others regard them as deceptive and manipulative. Brian received a life sentence in a high-secret jail as well. He has kept a low profile ever since being found guilty. He has not discussed his involvement in the crime in public or avoided interviews. Brian is known to be a challenging prisoner who frequently gets into arguments and acts aggressively, according to the staff. When it was revealed that he had gotten into a brawl with another prisoner in 2017, his name came up again. The event demonstrated that, despite his sentencing, his propensity for violent conduct had not changed. Brian, like Taylor, continues to serve as a reminder of the terrible consequences of not accepting responsibility and the destructive power one may wield over others. Despite his plea agreement, Troy, who was directly involved in the crime, was likewise sent to a high secretary prison, since his actions while incarcerated showed no signs of improvement. Although Troy's involvement in the crime was seen as the product of Brian and Taylor's manipulation, his readiness to deliver the lethal blows raised questions about his potential for rehabilitation, and he has hardly been discussed in the media since the occurrence. Christy Marks' friends and surviving family members continue to remember her. Following her passing, her senior care company was sold, and a portion of the money raised was given to organizations that assist victims of domestic abuse. Christy has frequently been characterized by her family and friends as a strong, kind woman who devoted her life to serving others. Even now, years after her passing, Christy's story serves as a reminder of the value of candid communication in families and the necessity of getting professional assistance when disputes get out of hand. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Marlene Warren, 40, and her 21-year-old son Joey were occupied with their weekend in their comfortable Wellington home on May 26, 1990, when Marlene heard the bell ring. It was a clown. When Marlene believed that someone had sent her a gift, she was ecstatic. Behind the paint and outfit, however, was a murderer who suddenly produced a gun and shot Marlene in the face. Why did they pick Marlene, and who was this murderer? Watch this space to discover out. Welcome back to Mysterious Hook, friends. We are examining the Marlene Warren case today. But first, if you haven't already, please think about clicking the bell symbol and subscribe button below to join our channel. So let's go straight to the riddle, without any more ado. People who wished to avoid the crime of West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami would move to Wellington, Florida, which was known as a village. Wellington hosted numerous celebrations and events all year long. A well-known event that drew equestrian lovers from all over the world, the Winter Equestrian Festival, took place from January to April. It included a range of contests and performances. Another popular event that featured bourbon tastings from different vendors and bacon-based food was the Wellington Bacon and Bourbon Fest. A local club named Mar-a-Lago used to host a number of well-known individuals, including Madonna and Bruce Springsteen. People feel comfortable and content in the town, which is a lovely environment with superb schools. Wellington has been described as a rather safe and tranquil community in terms of crime rates and safety. Wellington has been ranked as one of the safest cities in Florida and has a crime rate that is lower than the national average according to numerous polls. While everyone else was having picnics, barbecues, and parades over Memorial Day weekend in May 1990, the Warren family experienced a tragic event. The birth date of Marlene Warren is April 15, 1950. Growing up in Michigan, she enjoyed spending time on her grandfather's farm with her sisters. She loved to bake, paint, and create art, especially clowns. Her parents even had a room devoted to clowns, and the entire family loved them as much as she did. At the youthful age of 15, Marlene gave birth to her first kid in 1965, naming him after her husband, John Arns. She went on to have another child, Joey, in 1969. Unfortunately, Marlene's first husband, John Arns, passed away in a vehicle accident, leaving her a single mother of 2 children. Later, in 1972, she wed Mike, also known as Michael Warren. Marlene was 22 years old and Michael Warren was only 19. They relocated to South Florida, where Michael's family resided, from Michigan. In addition to starting to invest in rental properties, which finally generated a significant amount of revenue, Michael was hired as a meat inspector. Michael left his job to start Bargain Motors, a used car yard, while Marlene oversaw the rental properties. He sold automobiles to those without credit who were unable to purchase them elsewhere. Mike and Marlene purchased their ideal home in Wellington, Florida in the late 1980s. But Michael was arrested in 1983 for tampering with his second-hand automobile's odometers. Despite receiving probation and entering a guilty plea, he continued to operate his business for a few more years. While Marlene oversaw their rental homes, Mike concentrated on his business and spent time at the racetrack. The two led different lives. When Marlene's oldest son, John Jr., passed away in a vehicle accident in 1988 at the age of 22, sadness struck once more. The relationship between Michael and Marlene was strained after his passing. Sheila King, the spouse of Richard Spud Keene, one of Michael Warren's colleagues, was introduced to him at this period. The bond between Sheila and Michael was immediate. Though it was clear to everyone around them, they originally kept their relationship a secret. On May 26, 1990, a wet Saturday, Marlene, 40, stayed at home while Michael went to the racetrack. She was preparing breakfast for her 21-year-old son Joey, who was hosting some of his pals. A knock on the door occurred at approximately 10:45 a.m. Marlene thought it was a present when she opened it and saw a clown holding balloons and flowers. Having adored clowns since childhood, she was quite thrilled to see one at her door. However, a gun was in the clown's costume and underneath the balloons. After drawing his weapon, the clown shot her in the face. Joey witnessed the clown driving off in a Chrysler LeBaron after hearing the gunshot and running to the door. Bill Kramer, a neighbor, had also heard the shot, and Marlene was on the ground, dying. Some rushed outside, claiming that Joey's mother had been shot. Marlene was transferred to the hospital when an ambulance was summoned, but she passed away on May 28, 1990, 2 days later. Marlene was a wonderful person who was always polite, respectful, loving, and kind. Her demise, however, was regrettable. Joey saw a clown leaving after Marlene was shot, but all he could recall was that the clown had brown eyes. Joey initially gave the police a sketchy description of the culprit, stating that they had large hands and broad shoulders. Crucially, though, he did witness the clown drive off in a white Chrysler LeBaron. Michael Warren was initially under suspicion, but because he was at the racetrack, he had an alibi. Consequently, the cops focused on Sheila Keene, his girlfriend. The more they looked into it, the more proof they found that she was involved. At the time of the crime, Sheila Keene and Michael Warren were accused of having an affair. Although Michael strongly disputed allegations, authorities were examining the relationship to determine the opportunity and purpose behind Marlene's murder. Sheila had a criminal history from her childhood in Central Florida, and also went by her maiden name, Sheila Shelter. Sheila was renowned for being incredibly gorgeous, assertive, and even wild. Her long hair was frequently compared to that of Crystal Gale's. Sheila had a criminal history from an early age, which included charges of stealing and shoplifting. Her mugshot from a few years later showed her grinning, as if the arrest had not bothered her. According to those who knew her, Sheila had surrounded herself with negative influences and older males since she was a little girl. Richard Spud Keene, a former member of the Ku Klux Klan who had served time for drug trafficking, was her husband. Sheila was 20 years younger than Richard. In order to be near him when he was incarcerated, Sheila even relocated to Georgia. Richard began working with Michael Warren after Sheila's husband was released from Georgia prison, and they returned to Florida. The three ex-offenders soon started hanging out and doing shady things together. In one such instance, Sheila pretended to be a sex worker in order to meet a person in a motel room who had bought a car. The automobile was repossessed by armed Richard and Michael while she was inside. The buyer was also seen being held at gunpoint by Sheila, and the three of them escaped. Richard gradually slipped into the background as Michael and Sheila became closer. Sheila rented an apartment in Pine Ridge, and because Michael spent so much time there, the locals thought she was married to him. Investigators were informed by Michael and Sheila's co-workers that they thought the two were having an affair. They were immensely fond of one another and would go out for long meals. They were in fact having an affair, according to a lot of evidence. According to police documents, Michael's mother recalled an instance in which she went with him to a racetrack. She asked Sheila if she loved Michael after sensing a connection between them. Michael said that he loved himself, but Sheila affirmed that she did. At this time, Michael and Marlene's marriage was failing. Michael would come in angry after a battle with Marlene, according to a car dealership employee, and offer $10,000, 0 cents, to anyone who killed her. Michael is also reported to have stated that if someone were to get rid of his wife and never have to work again, he would make them wealthy. Michael and Sheila were both named as suspects in the case following Marlene's murder. Investigators began to wonder if Michael's girlfriend could have perpetrated the crime, even though he was the clear suspect. Since most males would shoot their victims in the heart rather than the face, the murder's character sparked suspicions. As the investigation progressed, the evidence began to implicate Sheila rather than Michael, which made detectives think that she might have had a reason for committing the murder. The police's primary objective during the inquiry was to locate the white Chrysler LeBaron that Joey had seen. They discovered that the vehicle had been rented by a couple from Payless Cars, a local car dealership. They became confused and called the incorrect number from a phone book ad when it came time to return the vehicle. The number on the advertisement was Michael Warren's, and it was for his vehicle dealership, Bargain Motors. However, Michael's advertisement bore a striking resemblance to one for the Payless car lot. Someone at Michael's car lot told the couple to leave the car outside the gate with the keys in the windshield wipers after they called the number, assuming it was for Payless Cars. But soon after, the vehicle was taken. Investigators found a Chrysler LeBaron in a Winn-Dixie parking lot about 5 miles from the crime scene on the day of Marlene's funeral. Inside the automobile, many hairs were found, some of which seemed to be from an orange and yellow fibered acrylic wig. But at the time, DNA technology was not yet advanced enough to accurately identify the fibers or the hair samples. Investigators discovered the location where the suspect purchased the clown suit, balloons, and flowers in addition to the vehicle. A few days prior to the murder, a woman walked in and asked for a clown costume, especially Ruby's clown costume, an afro clown wig, Bob Kelly clown makeup, and a sponge nose. according to two women who worked at the Spotlight Capazio costume shop, who told police. The woman insisted on buying the outfit that night, even though the store employees first encouraged her to come back the following day because they were closed. According to reports, she was about 5'8", had long chocolate hair, brown eyes, and was dressed in trousers and a men's work shirt. Sheila was identified by the police as the woman who visited the business at closing time a few days before to the murder, after the employees recognized her from a photo lineup. As the investigation into Sheila's possible involvement in Marlene's murder progressed, more evidence began to mount against her. One piece of evidence came from a public grocery in the area that offered the particular kind of mylar balloons the clown was using. An employee there recognized Sheila from pictures and recognized a long-haired woman with brown hair who purchased those balloons only an hour and a half before to the murder. The fact that Sheila had previously dressed up as a clown when married to Richard Keene only served to heighten suspicion. The pair resided in a Pahokee trailer park near Lake Okeechobee. Sheila had made friends with a number of locals, including some workers at a store that sold car parts. She had even entertained them by dressing up as a clown on one occasion. Prosecutors felt they lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest, in spite of this growing body of evidence. About a year later, in 1991, Michael and Sheila emerged as the main suspects, intensifying the inquiry. Michael and Joey appeared on a radio show in an effort to clear his name. Michael denied any involvement in the murder during the questioning. "Was it your suspicion that you were a suspect from the start, Michael?" He certainly never expected to. "In reality, I like to discuss that in detail." Joey, who was shocked to learn that Sheila was even a suspect, stood up for her. "Would it surprise you that she would be a prime suspect if you had heard, been told, or been asked that the police were suspicious? She is even named as a prime suspect in all of this." It was, indeed. Because of the clown's stature, Joey initially thought it was a guy, but the evidence was starting to suggest that it was a lady. Sheila was the main suspect, because Michael had an alibi to prove he was at the racetracks when the murder occurred. However, a twist that went back in time appeared just when it appeared that the case was going nowhere. Joey was accused with attempted murder in 1987, when he was about 18 years old. Christopher DeSantis became the attorney for the Warren family. DeSantis and Michael Warren were celebrating Joey's trial victory as they left the courthouse following a favorable hearing. Michael then jokingly inquired as to whether a person might still inherit their estate if they had hired a hitman to murder their wife. The lawyer was surprised, but he said that unless there was manslaughter or the murderer was someone else, the law forbade a murderer from inheriting. Sadly, DeSantis provided yet another example, which he eventually came to regret. According to him, it would be challenging to obtain a conviction if someone donned a clown suit because their identity would be concealed. It wasn't meant to suggest that he should wear a clown outfit or something similar, for instance, if you were wearing one. However, the point was that you cannot be found guilty if you are unable to provide identification of the offender. He didn't mean to suggest that Michael should dress like a clown, but the idea was that there couldn't be a conviction if identity couldn't be established. DeSantis had essentially handed him a murderous recipe. The authorities suspected that the clown figure was retaliating against Joey and his pals, so they also examined DeSantis as the inquiry into Marlene's death developed, and suspicions were placed on Michael and Sheila. However, this exchange between Michael and DeSantis later turned into a crucial piece of proof. It sparked speculation about whether Michael had heeded the lawyer's counsel and disguised himself as a clown to carry out the crime. It became evident during the course of the investigation that Marlene had previously indicated dread of her husband before she was murdered. She had expressed her desire to divorce Mike to others, but she was afraid he would murder her. When combined with DeSantis's assertion, this implied that Mike was aware of his right to inherit property following his wife's murder. In spite of this, no one was arrested in the weeks that followed these disclosures, because investigators need hard proof to move forward. The months passed with no resolution to the case. Although Michael and Sheila denied any romantic involvement, their co-workers suspected that they were involved. A year following Marlene's passing, they relaxed and went on a trip to the Bahamas, staying at the upscale resort casino hotel. Other couples saw them enter. Michael was loud and brazen, and Sheila looked uncomfortable. This alerted the authorities once more. Michael chose to appear on a radio show once again in the interim, and he revealed that he hadn't spoken to Sheila in a month, when in fact Sheila was constantly with Michael. Investigators started looking into Michael as a possible suspect in his wife's death after his radio appearance. They conducted a search of his company and secured a warrant to examine his documents. Investigators discovered that Michael, who had a history of fiddling with the odometer, had been repeating the behavior at his vehicle dealership. They accused him of theft, fraud, odometer tampering, and racketeering, among other offenses. Michael was given a 9-year prison term, but there was still no hard proof that he or Sheila were responsible for Marlene's death. In 1997, fresh evidence surfaced that would revive the case when it appeared that the inquiry had reached a standstill. A guy gave police a tip in 1997 that connected Michael Warren to the murder of his wife. According to the informant, who was the son of a recently deceased Bargain Motors employee, his father made a startling admission to him as he was near death. The informant claims that his father informed him that if he pulled up a car that was immersed in water, all the solutions to the case would be revealed. In addition to claiming to know who plotted the murder and where the clown suit and pistol were stored, he even provided the precise position of the car. Investigators thought that by reclaiming the murder weapon and outfit, they would finally be able to solve the case, because this was a significant lead. When divers were dispatched to the scene, they discovered the car, but regrettably, nothing important was within. Due to this setback, the investigation had to start over, and the case once more remained unsolved for a while. Sheila Keene and Michael Warren made the decision to wed in Las Vegas in 2002. Although the case was still open and the investigation into Marlene Warren's death had stopped, Marlene's parents were certain that Sheila was the murderous clown. Sheila was once again a top suspect when the investigation was reopened in 2013, especially because of her marriage to Michael. The Wellington clown murder is one of the cold cases that the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office is looking into thanks to a grant. To examine the evidence and speak with witnesses, they assembled a task team comprising representatives from the FBI and the state attorney's office. The indictment was obtained thanks to the task force's submission of fresh evidence for DNA analysis. This contained DNA samples from Sheila and Michael as well as other suspects in the case. The potential DNA samples discovered in the clown wig and additional hair strands within the Chrysler LeBaron were also added. Investigators were able to approach the case from a new angle thanks to the data gleaned via analysis and interviews. Mike and Sheila had made a fresh start in the little Virginian town of Abingdon, where they had completely changed who they were. Their neighbors described them as amicable and in love, and Sheila had even changed her name to Debbie. They appeared to be leading a nice life. Just across the line in Tennessee, they had even opened a well-known fast food restaurant named the Purple Cow. Michael and Sheila were eventually located at the restaurant by investigators. Even though they were primary suspects, they were still working and leading normal lives. They were neither fleeing nor attempting to hide. They appeared to be doing well and to have finally moved on from their past. Despite the fact that Michael Warren was typically seen as a joyful and easygoing person, not everyone had a positive opinion of him, particularly following an incident with one of his neighbors that revealed a different side of him. When questioned about his decision to steal some rocks from his neighbor's property without permission, Michael reportedly said that they ought to be considerate of one another. Asking for permission beforehand would have been the neighborly thing to do, the neighbor retorted. Then Michael insulted the neighbor, using a nasty phrase and labeling him skinny. The neighbor refused to back down and referred to Michael as a bully. A sinister mystery lurked in the background of Michael and Sheila's ostensibly perfect lives in Abingdon, Virginia. Sheila, who her co-workers called Debbie, told a terrifying story about how she had escaped punishment for murder in Florida while intoxicated one evening at a party. In the meantime, investigators in Florida worked tirelessly to solve the case, using the most recent DNA technology to identify a possible suspect in Marlene Warren's murder. The evidence suggested that Debbie, also known as Sheila Keene Warren, was the one who had carelessly revealed her lethal secret to her gullible co-workers. Mike and Sheila were stopped by the police on December 26, 2017, while they were returning from Vermont to their hometown of Abingdon in their Cadillac SUV. Sheila was taken into custody without question. Rather, she inquired as to if her spouse was also being taken into custody. Sheila was detained because she was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm, a crime that had gone unresolved for 27 years. Sheila had avoided arrest until that day, even though she had been a main suspect from the start of the investigation. She could now be sentenced to life in jail. A mugshot was taken when a video of Sheila being taken into the police station was caught. She is shown grinning in the mugshot, which is similar to the one from when she was initially detained as a teenager. It was disturbing to see the disparity between the seriousness of the act she was being charged with and her casual demeanor. Sheila King Warren vehemently denied any involvement in the crime, according to her attorney. She believed in her own innocence, as evidenced by the many letters she penned while there. Even though the murder weapon was still missing and 27 years had passed, and the clown's first description was that of a man, the state of Florida was certain they would get a conviction. Following her arrest in 2017, Sheila had been detained pending trial while detectives worked to strengthen their case against her. Ultimately, on April 25, 2023, Sheila, 59, entered a guilty plea to the charge of shooting Marlene Warren while disguised as a clown. Her attorney insisted she was innocent, but he thought her guilty plea strengthened her case. She might have received a minimum sentence of 25 years in prison if the jury had found her guilty. But because she entered a guilty plea, her term was lowered to just 12 years. Interestingly, Sheila's attorney even proposed that because of her outstanding behavior while inside, she might be released as early as 2024. The investigators were able to solve the case after Sheila confessed. However, do you believe Sheila meant what she said, or was she merely trying to find a way to get her sentence reduced? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. We are examining the unsettling case of Kim Wall, so let's go straight to the riddle without any more ado. Denmark's capital, Copenhagen, known to the locals as Copenhagen, is situated on the picturesque islands of Amager and Zealand. Denmark is renowned for its excellent architecture and design in general, but Copenhagen in particular is the main draw. In addition to a vibrant food scene, the lush, verdant city has a rich and diverse cultural environment. Copenhagen, home to more than 600,000 people, is considered one of the happiest cities in the world due to its laid-back lifestyle and progressive social views. Even though Denmark is a pleasant country, it did record 54 homicides in 2017, including the August 2017 murder of Kim Wall. On March 23, 1987, Kim Wall was born in Trelleborg, Sweden. Journalists Joachim and Ingrid Wall were her parents. Tom Wall was the only sibling she had. Kim developed into an exceptionally intelligent youngster who never wavered in her commitment to her objectives. She did exceptionally well at the London School of Economics, where she studied international relations. However, it didn't stop there. Kim advanced her education by pursuing a master's degree at Columbia University's School of Journalism, sometimes referred to as the Oxbridge of Journalism. Kim won awards for her year and was at the top of her class among her peers. Kim's approach to her work as a journalist mirrored her deep interest in people and their stories. Kim would do whatever it took to share people's experiences and give them a voice. Kim was a journalist for the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, the Swedish Embassy in Australia, and a European Union delegation in India. Numerous worldwide publications, including as the BBC, The Guardian, and the New York Times, have published her pieces. Kim lived in Copenhagen with her lover, Ole Stabi, a game and interface designer. Although she alternated between Beijing and New York, the two had big plans together and were incredibly in love. Relocating to Beijing, China was one of their goals. However, life had other ideas. Kim was spending time with her family on August 9, 2017, at her parents' home in Trelleborg, Sweden, so they could take their annual summer photo. Before August 9, 2017, her family had 29 photos since they had taken a family photograph every summer since Kim was a year old. Kim was also excited to get to Copenhagen because she wanted to see Ole. Before departing for China on August 16, 2017, Kim and Ole planned to host their friends at their apartment the next day to bid them farewell. Even though Tom, Kim's brother, was exhausted from working a night shift the day before, Ingrid, Kim's mother, realized that Kim's presence was an opportunity to take the family photo so she made sure they did so before she left. They had no idea that would be the final photo they would take together. Ole and Kim prepared their house for the house party on August 10, 2017. Friends soon arrived at their flat, but Kim received a call before the celebration could start. Peter Madsen, a Danish submarine inventor, made the call. Kim and Peter had already discussed an interview over the phone. Kim wanted to interview Peter for a story she was writing for Wired magazine. It was intended to be a brief interview to wrap up her report. So, before the celebration began, she asked Ole to excuse her. Before it was too late, Kim wanted to do the work as quickly as possible so she could resume her partying with her pals. Kim left for the interview after apologizing to her friends who had already arrived for the celebration. 3 submarines were built by renowned inventor Peter Madsen. In addition, he had constructed rocket ships and motivated many others with his endeavors. Peter invited Kim to accompany him on a flight aboard his 2008 launch submarine, the UC-3 Nautilus, since the interview was about his inventions. Peter invited Kim to meet him at Copenhagen Harbor, where Kim had a safe journey. Kim arrived at about 7 o'clock. Kim, who was first afraid to board the submarine, gained the strength to do so and carefully walked onto it, where Peter was already waiting for her. She knew it wasn't a huge concern by the time the soft wind blew about her as she stood next to Peter on the submarine's tower. Notably, she contacted Ole at 8 p.m. saying, "I love you, but I'm going down now." She also texted Ole, "I'm still alive." Even though it was Kim's final text, Ole didn't think there was an issue because he expected Kim to concentrate on her work. Shortly after that, Ole received another text from Kim that said, "He bought cookies and coffee though." Ole, however, soon became concerned. Ole was unable to get in touch with Kim, so it started to become later and later. Kim was supposed to return early as promised. He began to fear about 10 o'clock at night. At 1:43 a.m. he called the police after phoning everyone he could think of and informed them that his girlfriend had vanished. After Kim Wall was reported missing, the Danish police started looking for her. Kim was not located despite their hunt for the submarine she boarded prior to her disappearance, the UC-3 Nautilus. Throughout the night, the Danish Emergency Management Agency, DEMA, officers helped the police search the sea. They looked everywhere, trying to find Kim. In addition to utilizing cadaver dogs, the divers explored a huge area of the sea that was dark, traveling in all directions, front, back, right, left, center, and deep into the ocean. Approximately 5:31 a.m., Ole called Kim's mother Ingrid on August 11, 2017, to inform her that Kim had gone missing. Joachim and Ingrid were both in a panic and could only pray that Kim was still alive. Even after a thorough search, the police would not discover anything until approximately 10:30 p.m. The sub was discovered at a depth of 22 feet south of Copenhagen by a rescue aircraft in a harbor southeast of Amager, close to the Dragør lighthouse. Kim was not there, but the police did find Peter Madsen. Peter explained to the reporters who were on the search that a malfunctioning ballast tank was the reason the submarine sank. He added that he swam to a nearby fisherman's boat to get away after spotting it. The cops asked Peter about Kim's location because he never mentioned her in his account. He said that on the evening of August 10, 2017, just before the accident, he left Kim off at a local restaurant. When the police raised the submarine to examine it, they found something fishy. They found that the defective ballast tank had been intentionally tampered with. Additionally, investigators searched the submarine and discovered evidence of Kim's personal possessions and blood. Peter's story evolved once they asked him more questions. He reported to the police that he lost his hold on a large hatch door, which collapsed and struck Kim's head, causing an accident. When he checked, Kim had no pulse, according to Peter, and there was a lot of blood where she landed. The cops were aware right away that they needed to suspect Peter, but why? Nothing material was there to cling to. Since Kim's body had not been discovered, they were unsure of what actually happened to her. On August 21, 2017, 11 days after Kim Wall vanished, a cyclist made a gory find while crossing the beach south of Copenhagen. The torso of a human washed ashore on the beach. Following a call to the police department, they examined the torso and concluded it belonged to Kim Wall, the Swedish journalist who had been missing for 11 days. The remainder of the corpse was not connected to the torso, which had been horribly stabbed 14 times. Although Kim Wall's friends and family were aware that their loved one had passed away, they were still curious about what had happened to her on August 10, 2017. Until October 7, 2017, when divers discovered plastic bags in Kogi Bay, less than a mile from where Kim's torso was discovered, the authorities continued their quest for explanations without finding anything. When the plastic bags were opened, Kim's head and legs were within them. Metal fragments were fastened to the sacks to keep them from floating. Following these revelations, Peter was questioned once more and altered his account once more. This time, he claimed that Kim Wall passed away on his submarine due to poisonous gases. The cops were aware that Peter was concealing something because of his contradictory accounts. Because he was the last person to see Kim alive, and because he was unable to give precise information about what transpired while they were together, he was also the only suspect in the case. No one was arrested, since Peter never admitted to killing Kim and there was no solid proof to convict anyone. Nevertheless, the police continued their investigation as they were unable to operate on their presumptions. One of Peter's claims that Kim's head was struck by a hatch was refuted by the autopsy, which found no blunt trauma on her head. Additionally, the autopsy showed that Kim had been stabbed and shackled. Additionally, it revealed that she had asphyxia, indicating that she had either been stabbed in the throat or strangled. The police had grounds to detain Peter for additional interrogation in light of this evidence. When the authorities inspected his phone during the investigation, they discovered that on August 9, 2017, Peter had viewed a video showing a young woman in agony as she was gradually decapitated with a little knife. Additionally, his search history revealed that he looked up how to remove every photo from his iPhone. Investigators also discovered movies of women being killed on Peter's computer, and witnesses testified that Peter was observed practicing asphyxiation and watching videos of decapitation. The inquiry revealed that while Kim's body contained no evidence of Peter's DNA, the underpants, which were taken from Peter Madsen following the arrest, did contain bodily fluid traces. When questioned, Peter denied experiencing pleasure with Kim. Annie and Carl Madsen welcomed Peter into the world on January 12, 1971. His early years were spent in Denmark's Sabi and Hong. Annie had 3 additional boys from 2 prior men and was over 30 years younger than Carl. When Peter was 6 years old, Annie left the marriage with all of her children, allegedly because Carl mistreated his 3 stepsons. Years later, Peter moved back home with his father, who also had a passion for rockets. Peter was really interested in rocket fuel in school. He created his first huge rocket while studying chemistry and physics, and on March 3, 1986, he launched it. He based it on the American ICBM MX Peacekeeper and constructed it at his father's factory. The rocket performed admirably, ascending to a height of 100 meters before falling. Luckily, nobody was harmed. Peter lost his father when he was 18 in 1990. But he continued to explore and contact engineers. Additionally, he joined Copenhagen's Dark Rocket Club, a Danish amateur rocket club, but over time the other members lost interest in him. According to Dark members, he could activate the fire sprinkler system by only speaking his name. Although he never completed formal schooling, he did take engineering and welding classes to gain some knowledge of submarines. His passion paid off as individuals, businesses, and organizations saw his potential and provided financial support for his work and way of life. He constructed the UC-1 Freya, UC-2 Praka, and UC-3 Nautilus submarines. The Nautilus was a 3-year-long privately manufactured midget submarine that was launched on May 3, 2008 in Copenhagen, Denmark. The construction cost was about $200,000. Together with Danish architect Christian von Bengtsen, Peter co-founded Copenhagen Suborbitals on May 1, 2008. He departed the project in June 2014. Peter was in charge of the booster rocket engines, launch pad, and launch systems. Because of his inventions, Peter was already well-liked, and many people became interested in him without realizing that he was a different person on the inside. Only the murder of Kim Wall revealed who he really was. Peter Madsen, 47, was accused on January 26, 2018 with murder, assault from stabbing, and indecent handling of a corpse because of the dissection. On August 10, 2017, Peter was charged by the prosecution with binding, striking, placing, and strangling Kim on his submarine. Throughout the investigation, Peter refused to acknowledge that he had slain Kim. When Peter's trial started on March 8, 2018, he entered a not guilty plea to the allegations. According to the psychiatric evaluation, Peter was not delusional or psychotic, but rather a narcissistic psychopath. Peter was convicted guilty of all charges and given a life sentence on April 25, 2018. In court, Peter reportedly displayed no remorse. Instead, he intimidated people in the courtroom by staring at them from time to time. Because of Peter's behavior, the Wall family was once instructed not to let him pass in the courtroom. Peter insisted throughout the proceedings that Kim's death was an accident, even though he acknowledged that he had dismembered her body. He told the court, "I don't see how that mattered at the time, as she was dead." The family and friends of Kim, who never imagined that she would be murdered so near to her home, found closure in this sentence, even if Peter would not confess. They were all aware that Kim was a fearless journalist who would venture into hazardous areas to obtain the information she needed for her job. If they were ever concerned about Kim, it would be because she traveled far and wide for work, and they were all unaware that she would die suddenly in Copenhagen, where she lived. Following his life sentence, Peter attempted to appeal the decision, but it was denied. After he was caught, his wife, whom he married in 2011, requested that her name be kept secret and filed for divorce. He was hospitalized in August 2018 after being attacked by an 18-year-old prisoner who threatened to keep him there for the rest of his life. By frightening inmates with a phony firearm and fictitious explosives he had manufactured while incarcerated, he managed to break out in October 2020. He was surrounded by police in a residential neighborhood close to his Sylvester prison as they pursued him. However, because they believed he was carrying explosives, the police were unable to approach him. The cops waited for the explosive specialists to come after they were called. The cops detained him and returned him to the prison after the specialists arrived and discovered that everything had been a ruse. He had to appear in court once more for that offense, and on February 9, 2021, a Copenhagen court sentenced him to an extra 21 months in prison for attempting to flee. It appeared that the additional sentence would not impact Peter's jail term, even though he was already serving a life sentence. However, if a probation request were ever submitted, the extra sentence would be relevant. Throughout the case, Peter insisted that the death was an accident. However, the Danish tabloid Ekstra Bladet claims that Peter Madsen confessed during a documentary series in which he was secretly recorded. The show was based on almost 20 hours of telephone talks with Peter while he was incarcerated, which were secretly recorded. During one video, he is asked if he killed Kim, and he answers, "Yes." He also states, "There is only one who is guilty, and that is me." Kim's parents, journalists Joachim and Ingrid, were determined to publish their daughter's tale 3 years after her murder. They decided that the narrative would portray Kim as her family, friends, sources, and readers knew her to be, rather than the events leading up to her passing, since they found telling her tale to be therapeutic. According to Ingrid, the book serves as a means of introducing the world to Kim as a human being, a journalist, and a daughter. The book, A Silenced Voice, is a joyous chronicle of a life well lived amid a family's struggle to deal with a life being extinguished. It is a tapestry of history and present at the same time. It chronicles Kim's journey from London to Cuba, New York to Haiti, Beijing to Sri Lanka, gathering anecdotes from bylines and cherished companions along the way. It also follows the hours, days, and weeks that followed Ingrid and Joachim's awakening to the news of their daughter's disappearance and their discovery on TV that a stranger was facing murder charges. The establishment of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, a grant intended to assist female journalists, was another development that provided comfort to the Wall family. The life and death of Kim Wall are depicted in many TV shows in addition to the narrative penned by Kim's parents. The first is Tobias Lindholm's Danish-language television dramatization, The Investigation, which depicts the case's criminal inquiry. The 6-part series, which stars a variety of professional actors, debuted on September 28, 2020. Those involved in the case investigation were consulted in order to meticulously script the series. The investigation focuses on the research that led to Peter's accusation and conviction, rather than Peter or the actual crime. Into the Deep, the submarine murder case, which was directed by Emma Sullivan, was made available on Netflix in September 2022. The documentary video of Peter Madsen, his friends, and interns was used to chronicle his attempt to launch a rocket ship into space using his submarine as a command center. The film chronicled the occurrence in detail, as well as his life. After his lover passed away, Kim's boyfriend Oli Stabi found it difficult to react. Nevertheless, years later he talked about Kim and underlined what a wonderful person she was. The murder of Kim is an unsettling instance that demonstrates the depth of evil that exists in human nature. It also makes us consider the number of women who have faced danger in their diverse occupations. How did you feel about this particular case? Do you believe Peter Madsen received the justice he was due? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Loretta Jones leads us to Price, Utah in the United States. With fewer than 9,000 residents according to the 2010 census, Price is the biggest city in Carbon County. The majority of its citizens own their homes, giving them a suburban feel. Price is a stunning area for outdoor activities and is well known for its cavernous gorges, expansive deserts, and intriguing rock formations. Statistics show that there is a roughly 1 in 56 probability of becoming a victim of crime in Price. Our story starts here, in this quiet village. Loretta Jones and her 4-year-old daughter Heidi Jones resided at 460 E 400 South in Price. She put in a lot of effort there to support herself and her daughter. She was young and single, but she gave everything she had for Heidi, who recalled all of their wonderful times together. Heidi's dolls and much of her childhood clothing were handcrafted by Loretta. Their wonderful life together would soon come to an abrupt end on the evening of July 30, 1970. Unaware that it would be the last time she would see her mother alive, Heidi bid her goodnight with a kiss on that beautiful July night. When Heidi Jones awoke on the morning of July 31, 1970, she discovered her mother, Loretta, dead on the floor of their living room. Heidi, too young to properly understand, stepped outside. There she noticed Sue Ann Hovert, her neighbor, excavating worms at her flat. Hovert asked Heidi what she was doing after noticing her beckoning her closer. In response, Heidi said, "I can't. I think my mommy is dead." When Hovert heard these words, she instantly stopped what she was doing and went inside with Heidi to see how things were going in Loretta's house. Hovert discovered Loretta laying face down, her back and hair matted in blood, and she was completely nude from the waist down. Police Chief Art Poloni arrived at the site after Hovert phoned the police. On July 31, 1970, at approximately 11:40 a.m., the police arrived and verified Loretta's death. The living room was covered in blood, and Loretta had been stabbed 17 times. Since there was no evidence of forced entrance, the detectives concluded that she had known her assailant. Additionally, Loretta had no defensive wounds, suggesting that she had not attempted self-defense throughout the assault. The medical examiner determined that Loretta had body fluid on her and that she had been slain by a short, narrow knife. Unfortunately, there were no CCTV cameras to record the events, and DNA testing was only in its infancy at the time. Investigators looked to Heidi for answers because a young girl was there in the house when the crime occurred. Heidi informed them that she was warned not to leave her room by her mother after she had put her to bed. She added that on the night of the murder, she didn't hear her mother struggle or scream. The detectives were alarmed by what she said, though. Heidi had told the investigators that Tom did it. "Tom killed my mom." As they searched the house during the investigation, the cops started looking for explanations. This notepad contained an entry from Heidi's grandma, who was recording whatever Heidi said at the time. When the body was recovered, Heidi told her grandma, "It was Tom that killed my mom." Later, they located Loretta's diary, which had a name that sounded a lot like the one Heidi had mentioned, Thomas Egley. Before her death, Loretta dated Thomas for 2 months, according to the diary. They were only able to learn this about Thomas. The name that 4-year-old Heidi, who was asleep at the time of the murder, mentioned was the only other clue the investigators had to piece together the case, but the police soon had another lead to pursue. 10-year-old Kula Fennell, who lived 3 blocks from Loretta's home, was outside with her brother at 9:30 p.m. riding their bikes. As night fell, Kula's brother abandoned his bike and entered, and Kula chose to follow suit, leaving her bike outside. A man grabbed her from behind and covered her lips with his palm as she made her way to the main door. Fortunately, Kula was able to release her mouth from the assailant's hold and scream loudly. The man ran away in fear. Kula could see her assailant and the path he took. She informed the cops that he ran toward Loretta's residence. Since Thomas Egley was already a suspect in a murder investigation that same evening, his image was later included in a lineup at the police station. Thomas was taken in for interrogation after Kula identified him as the one who attempted to abduct her. The investigators thought Kula and Loretta's cases were connected. Thomas denied any involvement in either of the two occurrences when they questioned him about them separately on August 1, 1970. According to Thomas, he got a lift with other teens the night of the murder and was dropped off at a fast food restaurant in Price, where he ate hamburgers. Around 11:30 p.m., he claimed to have gone to Highway Rendezvous, a pub on Spring Lane Road, before returning home. He said that day, he didn't see Loretta. When the investigators went to the pub to inquire about if they actually saw Thomas that evening, the proprietor acknowledged seeing him. He had red spots on his shirt and appeared frightened and shaky, she observed. Thomas informed the detectives that since he had been painting all day, the red specks on his shirt must have been paint. The detectives took samples of Thomas's hair, blood, and fingerprints, as well as the clothes he claimed to be wearing that evening, regardless of what he stated. They felt they had sufficient grounds to arrest Thomas as a result, and they did. While Thomas and his fiancée, who was 8 months pregnant, were staying at a motel in Helper, Utah, Thomas was detained. However, prosecutors called witnesses who gave Thomas an alibi during the preliminary hearing on November 5, 1970. Since Thomas was known to have visited Loretta's house before to the occurrence, the prosecutors claimed that the fiber evidence resembled the rug she had at her house was insufficient. However, Thomas was charged with attempted kidnapping and jailed for 90 days after Kula Fennell named him as the man who attempted to kidnap her. In 1971, Thomas relocated to Rockford, Colorado, following his parole. For years, however, Loretta's case remained unresolved. After her mother passed away, Heidi had to cope with the trauma. Her grandma, who had taken her in right away after her mother passed away, would listen to her talk about the incident. She kept saying to her grandma that she didn't think Tom killed her mother. Her grandmother kept a journal in which she recorded everything Heidi said. Heidi added that Tom was cruel to Loretta and would frequently strike and slap her. The grown-ups in the family eventually sought to dissuade Heidi from talking about the incident and try to help her forget it. Heidi never forgot what had happened to her mother in 1970, even if she stopped talking about it. As Heidi got older, she realized that Loretta had to have suffered through the attack in order to keep her safe. Heidi decided that she owed her mother justice as a result, and she would obtain it for her. Heidi never forgot her mother's case, even if decades went by and she moved on with her life. Even though she still had a soft spot for her mother, she didn't advocate for the case to be reopened, until one day, after being inspired by the television program Unsolved Mysteries, she launched a large letter campaign, writing to the Carbon County Sheriff, Price City Police Department, and FBI. She wrote letter after letter, but none of them answered. David Brewer, a friend from high school, responded to a social media post made by 43-year-old Heidi in 2009. After a while, the two got back in touch, and Heidi found out that David was collaborating with the Carbon County Sheriff. Heidi saw this as a chance to revive her mother's case. In order to talk about her mother's cold case, she deliberately ran into David at a local arts festival. As David heard Heidi's story, he was struck by her tenacity and shocked that he had never heard of it throughout their high school years. Heidi told the story of how her mother kissed her goodnight, and then, when the door to her room opened, she told her not to leave, as though she knew something terrible was about to happen. She described how she thought her mother had been murdered by Tom. Despite her hazy recall, Heidi vaguely remembered what appeared to be Tom forcing her mother to have sex with him or stabbing her, but she missed her mother's cry. David chose to assist after hearing her story. At last, Loretta's case was reopened. The odds were stacked against David Brewer when he began working on the case. He attempted to use the crime files, but they were no longer there. He just had Heidi's hazy recollection and previous media attention. For additional interrogation, David located Thomas, who was residing in Rockford, Colorado. In response to his question concerning the evening of July 30, 1970, Thomas described his meals and activities for the day, but stated that he was unable to recall Loretta's name. Although David was certain that Thomas might be the murderer at that very moment, he was forced to depart without making an arrest, since there was insufficient evidence to indict him. In order to question her, David Brewer also located Thomas's ex-girlfriend, Marcia Hidalgo. When Thomas arrived home late on the night of the murder, Marcia informed David that he immediately showered while still clothed. When Thomas got home from the laundromat the following day, a number of his clothes were gone. Marcia claims that Thomas told her that he gave hamburgers to a woman and her daughter when she questioned him about his whereabouts. Despite his inability to understand the material, David grew increasingly certain that Thomas killed Loretta. Exhumation was the final remaining choice after David had exhausted all other options. After David expressed his opinions, Heidi unexpectedly stated that she would even fetch a shovel to dig the grave herself if it would bring justice for her mother. He wasn't sure how Heidi would feel about exhuming her mother's body. Heidi sobbed several times as they carried out the exhumation, but when the body was excavated, they found that the entire body had been ruined by water, which prevented them from getting the necessary evidence. In spite of this, they inflated the results for the public, saying they had discovered fresh evidence that offered a lead. After the news spread widely, David soon got a call from a woman named Linda. Linda clarified that she made the decision to contact the detectives after recalling the details of the exhumation she had seen on television. She informed David Brewer that Loretta had used her blood to write the murderer's name. David was shocked and inquired as to how she knew this, given that the police had forbidden anyone from entering the scene of the incident. Linda clarified that throughout her high school years, when the murder occurred, she resided at Heidi's grandmother. Heidi's grandfather instructed Linda and one of Heidi's aunts to go to Loretta's house and pack Heidi's things the day following the event. Linda claimed that after the police let them in, she spotted a capital T and a O with her own eyes. This was a significant development in the case, but they required a picture of the crime scene to support their claims. David visited with Heidi and gave her the update. He complained about how difficult it was to locate any pictures of the crime scene because they were all gone. Heidi instantly recalled that a picture might be in a box of items her grandma had stored for so long. Everything connected to the case, including the notebook in which her grandmother recorded everything Heidi had said about the case, was discovered when they searched her grandmother's home for the box. The picture of Heidi standing close to her mother's body shape was the most eye-catching thing. Although the image was unsettling, it ended up being really helpful. The letters T and O were in Heidi's and her mother's blood in the picture. David Brewer started assembling the pieces. He noticed in the journal that Heidi had talked about how cruel Tom had been to her mother and how she had informed everyone that Tom was to blame. The most significant detail was that while fighting for her life, Loretta was attempting to write her killer's name with her blood, but she was only able to write O. Despite this picture, the detective still needed more to apprehend Thomas Egley, who was now thought to be Tom. The case was put on hold once more until someone made the decision to assist. Lisa Carter, claiming to be Thomas Egley's neighbor, called the police department. She claimed that after watching the exhumation film, Thomas came up to her and asked if she could monitor his dogs because the police could soon face him. Lisa Carter volunteered to assist in the investigation, since she thought Thomas was Loretta's murderer. In order to obtain Thomas's confession, she asked to wear a recording device. After the cops gave their approval, plans were formed. Lisa lied to Thomas, claiming that her husband had been in Utah undergoing detective training. She informed Thomas that he had already been mentioned as the murderer of Loretta Jones. Thomas was shaken by these remarks, but he held off on confessing right away because he still didn't trust Lisa. On July 26, 2016, 2 days after earning Thomas's trust, he started discussing the events of the evening of July 30, 1970, with Lisa. According to Thomas, Loretta opened the door when he knocked. He felt unworthy after Loretta rejected his assertion that he was in her home for intimacy. He claimed that after Loretta returned from leaving him in the living room to fetch something from the kitchen, he grabbed a little knife and stabbed her. Thomas proceeded to have sex with Loretta after stabbing her, saying it was consensual. After Loretta denied, a perplexed Lisa questioned how it was consensual. However, Thomas responded that Loretta never declined him during that period. When she questioned him what happened after, he replied that he slit Loretta's neck because he had lost it all after becoming intimate with her. Lisa claims that Thomas expressed all of this without expressing regret for his actions. He seemed to be concerned exclusively with his personal security. The investigators only needed the confession to take Thomas into custody. Thomas Egley is not well recognized. Caroline Kendall, Loretta's sister, claims that she was only aware of Loretta's one blind date with Thomas. Loretta informed Caroline that she didn't want to interact with Thomas since she didn't like him. That's why Loretta turned down Thomas's approaches that evening. Thomas Egley, 76, was a local vagrant who had lived in a variety of locations both before and after killing Loretta. His home life was never steady. He had been married 3 times and lived with numerous women. The majority of his time was spent alone, despite having 5 children. Thomas Egley was charged in August 2016 with both forced intimacy, a first-degree felony, and the legal equivalent of first-degree criminal murder in the 7th District Court. Criminal homicide or murder in the 2nd degree was Thomas's formal charge. At the time, Utah law considered murdering to be a statutory violation. On August 18, 2016, Thomas was apprehended without incident near Rocky Ford, Colorado, pursuant to a $1 million 0-cents warrant. Thomas's assault case was withdrawn after he entered a guilty plea to the murder. On November 22, 2016, he was subsequently given a sentence of 10 years to life. A written statement given by his lawyer, David Allred, stated that Thomas was sorry for what he had done, although it didn't seem to be genuine. Other than that, Thomas never expressed regret. Thomas stated in court that he couldn't understand why the deceased's family decided to restart a case from 46 years ago, even though he felt he should be released because he hadn't committed any crime since killing Loretta. Even after 46 years, Thomas didn't appear to regret what he had done. Thomas claims that when he killed Heidi's mother, he was unaware that she was present. Because Loretta was aware of this, she never resisted or yelled as he was stabbing her. If Thomas had known Heidi was present, he probably wouldn't have spared her. He protested to the judge after being sentenced that he didn't like his incarceration, which was Salt Lake County's state prison, since it didn't let him have visitors. He might appeal, the court informed him. Heidi, who suppressed her pain for more than 40 years, had the chance to express her entire thoughts to the person who killed her mother. She talked about how painful her mother's passing was, and how she hoped Thomas Egley would stay in prison and never have to see his loved ones again. Even if he were eligible for parole after 10 years, she also promised to ensure that he never walked free. Heidi referred to it as justice, even though others called it closure, claiming that nothing could provide her with the relief and closure she required. For her, it was crucial that justice was done. As this tragic tale of Loretta Jones's passing draws to a close, we are reminded that not all wounds, particularly those of the heart, can be healed with time. Additionally, we are reminded of the evil that exists inside our nature. We are left with the intriguing question of why Thomas Egley decided to orphan Heidi at such an early age, given his clean slate with the law. Before we leave, I would like to ask you a brief question. How did you feel about the way Loretta's case was initially handled? Considering everything that was accessible to them at the time, do you believe that law enforcement could have performed better? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. It became a nightmare on New Year's Eve. Statistics show that a crime's nature is significantly influenced by the time of day it is committed, such as during the day. Domestic violence occurrences are more widespread in the evening, as are economic crimes such as robberies, thefts, scams, etc. However, crime and the most heinous acts of evil occur at night, when the streets are dark and almost empty, making it difficult to identify a criminal. It is common knowledge that it is dangerous for women in particular to stroll alone on city streets at night. However, there are situations when it is unavoidable. The narrative of Rachel Moran, a young British woman, started this way. She had to go back home on New Year's Eve after spending time at her parents' house. Rachel never made it home this time, vanishing 150 feet from her destination, even though the distance was just roughly 1 mile along a path she walked every day. After a month of searching in the hopes that the young girl might still be alive, the shocking revelation stunned Ireland as a whole. Rachel Moran was who? On January 17, 1981, Rachel Moran was born in English Call, Ireland. In the family of Wanda and Ray Moran, she was the youngest of 4 children. She was raised with a brother and 2 older sisters with whom she had a deep bond from an early age. Rachel's passion was dance. Seeing her interest, her parents signed her up for a ballet class, which she continued to attend for many years. She even intended to pursue a career in this industry, either as a choreographer or a ballerina. But as she got older, her opinions and tastes started to shift. After graduating from high school, Rachel enrolled in a prominent university to study management information systems because she was an exceptional student who had a preference for the exact sciences. About 2 years into her studies, Rachel came to the conclusion that her career choice had been a mistake. She chose to return to choreography and continue her study as her artistic side took control. She met Mark, a young man who was just a year older than her while working part-time during this time. They became close very fast, and their friendship soon developed into a romantic partnership. After deciding to live together approximately 6 months after meeting, the couple rented a modest apartment in a brand new, comfortable apartment building that was only a mile from Rachel's parents' home. So she went to see them nearly every day. Rachel began working at a nearby bakery in the fall of 2002, specializing in confectionery decoration. She became enamored with this profession and gave pursuing a second degree in culinary arts some serious thought. It should be noted that one of Rachel's interests was cooking, and she was always good at it. Additionally, Mark and Rachel loved and cared for 2 cats they got from a nearby animal shelter in 2002, treating them nearly like children. The young couple fed the pets on time, took care of them in every manner they could, and made an effort to avoid leaving them alone at home for extended periods of time. A dispute on New Year's Eve as the 2003 New Year's celebration drew near. Everyone in the area was occupied with getting ready for the celebrations, selecting recipes for the holiday table, and purchasing presents for their loved ones. Rachel was trying her hardest to stay up to date for the holidays while juggling a lot of orders at work. Since one of their cats was ill and required special attention, she and Mark wanted to see both of their parents without leaving them alone at home all night. The location and manner of the couple's New Year's celebration had already been decided. Mark had planned to see his parents after spending some time with them at home, but he was expected to return to the apartment he shared with Rachel after midnight. Rachel planned to visit her parents' house before midnight and remain there till dawn, but she had made plans to meet her brother at a bar. The evening proceeded as planned for the most part. Following a romantic supper and glass of champagne at home, Rachel's brother picked her up as Mark went to see his folks. After hanging out with her brother until about 11 p.m., Rachel and her brother headed to her parents' house, where her mother, father, and sister were waiting for them at the celebratory table. Rachel contacted her lover on their home phone at 1 in the morning, but he didn't pick up. She tried calling his cell phone a couple more times without luck. She asked Mark where he was after he responded. Mark acknowledged that he couldn't say no to a close friend's invitation to a party, even if he had gone home as they had planned. They had decided not to leave the animals alone until morning and that someone should be at home at night to care for them, including one that wasn't feeling well, which infuriated Rachel. Rachel, following a brief argument. Mark insisted that nothing significant would occur during those few hours and promised to return by 6 a.m. Rachel, however, was furious and insisted that someone must remain with the animals. The discussion ended in a furious dispute, though, as her lover refused to back down. Even though it was already past midnight and it seemed dangerous to go alone on the street, Rachel was upset and furious and started getting ready to head home. Her mother attempted to dissuade her daughter from leaving after overhearing her arguing with her boyfriend on the phone. Wanda assured her daughter that nothing awful would happen to the animals in such a short time, so she encouraged her to wait until dawn. Rachel, however, was determined and had already started dressing. Her mother didn't want to let her go because she was so concerned about her. Rachel was already standing at the open door when they began arguing loudly and went on. Her mother, however, was unable to persuade her. No one could go with Rachel because her brother and father had already gone to bed and were heavily intoxicated. She left her parents' house at around 1:30 a.m. and nobody ever saw her alive again. Disappeared into the shadows. Rachel told her mother that as soon as she got home, she would give her a call. An hour and a half went by and her daughter still hadn't called, even though the trip should have taken no more than 15 minutes. No one picked up the house or mobile numbers when the anxious mother started phoning her. It was close to dawn when Mrs. Moran eventually dozed off on the couch in the living room while holding the phone. On January 1, she heard her husband on the phone when she woke up at 9:30 a.m. She thought he was talking to Rachel since he used the word daughter. But as soon as he ended the call, he revealed that it was their oldest daughter, who had been attempting to contact her sister all morning and was beginning to become anxious. The mother became frightened upon hearing this. When she dialed the home phone, a drowsy Mark answered, not knowing what was going on, and she attempted to reach Rachel again, but her cell was off. It turned out that Mark thought his girlfriend had stayed with her parents and just went to bed when he got home at 7 a.m. from the party and didn't see her there. When Mark found out that Rachel had left for their apartment throughout the night but never showed up, he was shocked. She would have fed the animals first, so he was positive she hadn't been home, but he didn't know where she could be. But the cats were obviously hungry and the bowls were empty. They had left the apartment together the night before and their bedroom bed was made, and there was no indication that anyone had come in. Inquiring as to whether they had seen Rachel or had any communication with her, Rachel's parents and boyfriend started phoning all of their friends, family, and acquaintances, but it was all for nothing. Even though Rachel was 21 years old, the police did not wait the customary 24 hours before conducting an urgent search after the Moran family reported her missing to them that same day. After speaking with all of Rachel's family members, friends, and Mark, the police thoroughly ruled out the chance that she had fled on her own. They also investigated Rachel's apartment and her parents' house, where she was last seen. It should be mentioned that the missing woman looked really beautiful. Tall and slender, she had long platinum blonde hair and lovely facial features. People would surely remember her if they saw someone like her on the street. Thus, investigators started looking for potential witnesses. Stranger in the dark. It was not yet possible to track a location using a mobile signal in 2002, and the girl's phone's call and message logs yielded no leads. All that was known was that the gadget had been switched off about 15 minutes after Rachel had left her parents' house, and based on the time, she should have been close to her own house by then. Rachel's mother was speaking with law enforcement again, when she abruptly remembered something crucial that she had neglected to bring up before. As it happens, they continued to argue loudly at the door while her daughter was already outside. Wanda urged her to wait till morning since she didn't want to let her go. She then caught sight of a man passing their residence on the street. She even considered asking him to go home with Rachel, however, she didn't. In the dark light, Wanda was unable to see the visitor clearly. She couldn't even provide a basic description because all she saw was a figure wearing a dark jacket and cap. But this individual might be a criminal or a useful witness. The authorities requested that all locals, including store owners, provide any surveillance camera footage they may have, since they needed to find him quickly. Investigators were able to determine that the missing girl passed the same business around 1 minute after the unidentified man did, and that the store was roughly 400 feet from Rachel's parents' home. Because of the low quality of the tape, it was impossible to make out the man's face or any other distinguishing traits, but it was evident that Rachel had traveled around half of the way home. The detectives chose to employ a strategy that frequently aided in missing person investigations as the hunt went on. After identifying a female who looked a lot like Rachel, they ordered her to walk the same path at night while wearing the exact same outfit as Rachel had on the night she vanished. After all of this was captured on camera, the news broadcast the video of the blonde strolling down the street at night and asked anyone who had seen her on New Year's Eve to come forward. The strategy was successful, as multiple witnesses claimed to have seen a dark male silhouette and a lone girl walking. But the man went by first, then the blonde, according to a witness who was smoking on a balcony. According to another witness who lives close to the apartment building where Rachel lives, the girl went by first, then the man came a few feet later. This implied that the stranger was either someone else or that they had fallen behind. About 150 feet from the girl's home, another camera was found along her path 10 days into the search. In the video, Rachel was seen passing by with a male in close pursuit. Given that he was dressed in the same clothes and had a similar build, there was little question that it was the same individual. There were unsettling hints that the man had once allowed the girl to pass in front of him before starting to follow her. Within a few days following the girl's disappearance, a massive search was launched for her. Detectives used aircraft, search dogs, divers, and hundreds of volunteers to mark a 10-mile search radius. They swept across woodland areas, wastelands, streets, and waterways. Artificial canals and tiny streams were drained for a detailed examination, and the search was carried out both on the ground and in the air. However, time went by with no outcomes. Given that Rachel had not used her cell phone or made any purchases using her bank card since going missing, authorities assumed she was dead. Her family, however, hoped to discover her alive and well. A sneaker that Rachel's family recognized was discovered in a drainage ditch close to her house 2 weeks later. Rachel's mother claims that on the day she vanished, she was wearing those shoes. Officers discovered a black purse with an ID card in Rachel Moran's name, a makeup bag, a wallet with bank cards, and a cell phone in one of the drained streams a few days later. Since all of the evidence was discovered within a mile of Rachel's house, the police speculated that the potential offender might reside nearby. He probably concealed the body here as well, if this scenario is accurate. This prompted the creation of a strategy to search every home within 2 miles of Rachel's residence, door to door. More cops were brought in, each working with a partner to reduce hazards and sad findings in the trash chute, because of course this took a lot of time and resources. The young woman had been going door to door for almost a month. Because it was hard to locate householders at their homes, and because the police required permission to enter the property, the search for neighborhood inhabitants was moving slowly. When a policeman and his aide arrived at another residence on Nash Court on January 28, they were instantly confronted by an unpleasant smell. Michael Little, 23, the homeowner, reassured them that there was nothing to be concerned about, saying that he was waiting for a plumber to clear the clogged plumbing. His friend Marcus was paying him a visit at the time, but he had no idea what the cops were looking for and had only seen them. Although nothing unusual was discovered in the house, the officers' suspicions were heightened by the lingering, sickening stench. It was discovered that a small trash chute, filled with bags of different wastes, was the cause of the stink rather than the restroom. After deciding to examine its contents more closely, the cops removed a number of bags and found a human within, an egg protruding. The homeowner and his visitor were taken into custody by the police, who promptly requested reinforcements. While his companion had a full-blown meltdown when he saw the dead female, Michael was totally composed and even detached during the entire ordeal. It was difficult to remove the body from the small trash chute, and it was not apparent how it had ended up there in the first place. The victim was nearly naked, and it was impossible to determine the cause of death right away because of the advanced level of decomposition, but there were obvious stab wounds all over the body. According to the suspect's account, the scent had been driving him insane, so he was pleased the body had been discovered. He also gave his account of what happened that fateful night, although it didn't sound very credible. He claims that he heard the mother and daughter arguing while he was strolling down the street and deduced that the girl intended to go somewhere by herself. He pursued her, they started talking, and he got to know her. Rachel allegedly accepted Michael's invitation to enter his home when they arrived. Little claims that they had a little drink, talked, and then, with their cooperation, had sexual intercourse before he went to sleep. According to the suspect, the girl in the kitchen was acting strangely when he got up at 5 in the morning. He had a small bag of illegal narcotics on the table, and he presumed that his visitor had taken something from it. Then, he said, she snatched a knife and charged at him, but he was able to take the weapon from her and hit her with a series of deadly blows. Michael explained the whole thing away as a bad accident that happened while he was defending himself. Everyone who knew the dead girl, of course, didn't agree with this version. To begin with, Rachel would never have gone anywhere with him, much less talked to a stranger on a nighttime desolate street. Thoroughly, she had never used any illegal substances in her life, and secondly, she would never have cheated on her lover. The girl's distinctive internal injuries and the discovery of little seminal fluid inside her were indicators of personal aggression, according to the autopsy. A third of the 27 stab wounds on the victim's torso came from behind, and none of them appeared to be self-defense. Michael Little is who? When police investigated the suspect's background after his arrest, They found that the young man already had a lengthy criminal history. He was caught stealing several times while still in school and came from a dysfunctional household. In addition, he never completed his education, which prevented him from obtaining even a mediocre job because he lacked a foundational education. He subsisted on both benefits and money he obtained unlawfully. He had been arrested multiple times for distribution and possession of illegal narcotics. Little was characterized by acquaintances as a pathological liar. He was always bragging about his sexy adventures and his impressive number of lovers, but in truth, every girl attempted to stay away from this weird and violent man. But Michael had been inventing more and more stories lately about a tall blonde he was supposedly seeing, even though no one had ever seen her with him. Since the victim and the suspect lived in the same neighborhood and had houses only a few hundred feet apart, police theorized that the suspect may have seen the victim before. He probably started to fantasize about the girl and tell his buddies about her when he became interested in her. When the criminal saw her alone herself on the street that fateful night, he took advantage of the situation and attacked her. But this new, even stranger version was the first time the victim and her attacker had ever met. As the inquiry went on, the suspect abruptly withdrew his first claims and gave a completely different account, saying that the true perpetrator was his friend Marcus, who was also detained. Marcus allegedly brought the girl to his home after meeting her on the street that evening. After sharing a drink, the visitors started displaying interest in the homeowner, so they withdrew to his bedroom. The accused claims that following the private meeting, a furious Marcus stormed into the room, upset that Rachel had opted for someone else. After killing the girl with a knife, he threatened Michael with harm and demanded that he assist in concealing the body and keep quiet about what had transpired. The accused and his attorney swore that this was precisely how events had transpired, but of course no one believed this narrative. But there was no proof that Marcus was involved. He had a New Year's Eve alibi for the crime, and his response upon the body's discovery suggested that he was unaware of the nightmare that had taken place at his friend's house. Trial and sentencing. The precise events of that fatal night could only be partially reconstructed, because Michael never acknowledged his guilt. Little was found to have gone to a party on December 31, 2002, and was getting ready to celebrate the new year with pals there. He was cruelly rebuffed when he tried to flirt with one girl, and the same thing happened with another, leaving him drunk and furious. After leaving the gathering and making his way home, Michael ran into Rachel and let go all of his bottled-up anger. He chose to pursue the girl after hearing her and her mother quarrel. After waiting for his victim to pass by in a dark alley off the road, the thief followed her as they passed Michael's house. He assaulted Rachel and repeatedly stabbed her in the back. He probably took advantage of the poor girl after dragging her inside his house, then killed her with the same knife and hid her body in the garbage chute. Little was found guilty in October 2003 of assaulting and killing Rachel Morin. He was given a life sentence with the prospect of release only after 35 years. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. What caused the beauty queen's life to be stolen? It is said that beauty is a strong force that can save the world. But regrettably, it does not always translate into happiness and can even cause problems. Gorgeous girls are constantly the focus of attention and typically have a large following. But in addition to admirers and customers, famous beauties and crowned beauty queens are surrounded by a large number of jealous people, well-wishers, and obsessive stalkers who sometimes act erratically. The terrible death of young Kimberly Oliveira became one of the most startling and impactful cases in South America. The girl who competed for the title of Miss Brazil and won other beauty pageants was cruelly and deceitfully deprived of her life. Her aspirations for popularity and recognition were drastically different from what the model had anticipated. People adored Kimberly's freshness and beauty, and her name did become well known outside of her home nation. Both the numerous heights she may have still attained and the horrible way she passed away in her prime period appalled them at the same time. Kimberly Oliveira was who? On February 26, 1998, Kimberly Karen Mota de Oliveira was born in the small, charming Brazilian town of Manacapuru, which is part of the state of Amazonas municipality of the same name. She grew up with her two younger brothers as the only daughter and eldest child in Nyla and Jose Oliveira's family. It might be claimed that the girl, who had Indian, Spanish, and Brazilian ancestry, won the genetic lottery. Her stunning appearance attracted the attention of everyone in her vicinity like a magnet. Kimberly was petite and feminine, with a brilliant smile, thick, opulent hair, and perfect skin. With both adults and peers comparing her to an angel, the beauty was accustomed to widespread attention, affection, and admiration. She loved swimming, participated in dancing and gymnastics from an early age, and was very particular about her looks and demeanor. She learned foreign languages, went to the theater frequently, read a lot, and did exceptionally well in school at the same time. Kimberly, who was already in her teens, started taking part in beauty pageants where she won prizes and posed for ads and clothing catalogs. Given that her mother, Nayla, was also a well-known beauty in her younger years and had won multiple titles, including Miss Manicure, she was certain in high school that she wanted to tie her life to the modeling industry. But after being married, Nayla gave up her modeling profession to support her family and raise their 3 kids. Kimberly enjoyed to pose in front of the camera and recognized her exceptional physical characteristics. She participated in exhibitions, was frequently featured in fashion magazines, and was formally crowned the most beautiful girl in her hometown. She was also a strong candidate for Miss Brazil and made it to the finals of the Miss Amazonas competition in 2017, ready to compete again. She might have advanced to renowned competitions like Miss World or Miss Universe if she had won. Oliveira was well aware, nevertheless, that charm and beauty were insufficient to prevail at this level. There, contestants are also assessed on their moral character, education, philanthropic endeavors, and other factors. Candidates for the title of Beauty Queen must also be free of criminal histories, legal troubles, and nude picture shoots. Kimberly avidly supported sports, good eating, and a healthy lifestyle on her social media sites. She also shared pictures from different photo shoots, talked about her life, and just engaged with her increasing fan base. Her page on a well-known social media platform reached tens of thousands of followers by 2019. The model wanted to inspire and motivate her followers by being a role model. She made the decision to go to college when she was 19 with the goal of becoming a dentist by enrolling in medical school. Kimberly relocated to Manaus, the capital and largest city, in order to accomplish this. Her maternal uncle Henry lived in the state of Amazonas. She went from a small, peaceful area to a large, busy city after passing the required tests and starting university, eventually relocating to her family home. Oliveira made friends, adjusted to her new surroundings fast, and managed to balance her education with involvement in various projects and sports commercial campaigns. Tenacious and crafty admirer. When Kimberly had free time between studying and picture assignments, she would typically hang out with her pals in different locations as a big group. A dashing young man called Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez approached Kimberly and her close friend as they were having a good time at a well-known club in the fall of 2019. He offered to buy Oliveira a beverage because he wanted to get to know her. The model, however, who was used to the increased attention and knew how to respond to such circumstances, graciously rejected, stating that she was not alone and that she didn't require anything. Rafael merely went after apologizing for the disruption. However, the girl was still unaware that the stranger had planned and choreographed the entire incident. In actuality, the man had been paying close attention to the young model on social media for a year or two, but he had never tried to get in touch with her until that day. He chose to appear to be seeing her for the first time and only want to meet her because he was familiar with the locations the beauty frequented. Rodriguez, who was 31 at the time, had just gotten divorced and was completely enamored with the prospect of meeting Kimberly and falling in love with her after reading on social media that the model had relocated to Manaus. He likewise relocated to the city, where he rented a large apartment in a posh residential complex and promptly secured a lucrative position in corporate law, thanks to his legal education. He then started carrying out his strategy, keeping a careful eye on Oliveira and waiting for the ideal opportunity to speak with her. Rafael made the decision to come out of hiding and began sending the girl private messages on social media, inviting her out on a date, following the failed attempt to meet at the nightclub. For several months, he also consistently liked and commented on every post the model made on her profile. Since she frequently found herself in similar circumstances, and this man didn't especially stand out, she ignored the obstinate follower and gave him no particular attention. In an attempt to win their friendship and trust, Rodriguez then modified his strategy and added Kimberly's friends, classmates, and even family to his list of acquaintances. This strategy worked, and he was able to get her phone number from a close friend. Then, the maniacal stalker started sending her messages on instant chat, proposing to meet up. The man examined the thing he admired. Well, being aware of her preferences, travel habits, musical tastes, and so forth, he began going to training sessions outside, sometimes led by Oliveira herself, and it was only there that he was able to get her attention. After speaking for a while, they started phoning and contacting each other frequently on social media. Despite the fact that the two young people were about 10 years apart in age, Rafael was able to attract the girl's attention because he was well prepared. The man approached the girl with caution, attempting to court and please her in a lovely way without frightening her away or causing her to forget about him. His strategy was successful, and Kimberly and Rafael formally began dating in March 2020 after declaring their relationship. The passionate owner, the handsome and romantic man who tried his hardest to earn the beauty's love, showed his true nature. He immediately began tracking his sweetheart's every action as soon as they started dating, demanding to know where she went, who she spoke to, who messaged her, and everything else. At first, the girl even thought it was funny because she had never been restrained or managed before. But things became worse every day, and Rafael started acting more aggressively and invasively. He now made decisions over who Kimberly could block, who she could reply to, when she could go live, and which pictures she could share on social media. She soon became weary of this. They got into a heated dispute as he tried to establish personal limits the man couldn't breach. Rodriguez had to make amends and provide an apology. He offered the girl a big bouquet of flowers and invited her to a fancy restaurant. After every fight, he said this again. The man promised Oliveira he would never leave him and provided her expensive presents or romantic dates at hip places to keep her from leaving him after he had followed her so long and relentlessly. Kimberly was complaining to her friends more and more about her partner, claiming that she was unable to move further without his consent. Even at the university, Rafael prohibited her from talking to men. He also stole her phone without her consent, reviewed her messages and calls, and then made a scene. At times, he became so enraged that the girl worried about her safety. Her friends acknowledged that this was unusual and suggested that she speak with the man seriously before leaving him before it was too late if nothing changed. Knowing that she would soon have a successful modeling profession, diploma, defense, international travel, fashion magazine photo shoots, popularity, and recognition, Kimberly also realized she didn't want to live this way. She didn't want to sacrifice all for shaky relationships with an obsessive and unstable owner who tried to control, limit, and treat her like an object. Final judgment by the beginning of May 2020. Kimberly made the decision to end her relationship with Rafael after 2 arduous months, but she wasn't sure how to do it without making him angry. She waited for the ideal opportunity to break the news, but there was no longer any room for delay. Kimberly always spent Mother's Day with her mother, which was observed on May 10 in Brazil, but she was unable to visit her homeland to celebrate her mother because of the COVID-19 pandemic's restrictions in 2020. Rather, Kimberly shared a picture of them together, along with heartfelt words of appreciation and a heartfelt message. Nayla was receiving treatment at the hospital at the time following her cancer diagnosis. Kimberly and a few pals, including Rafael, went for a run at the park after posting. Everyone who saw the pair that day said they were having a lovely conversation and weren't fighting, and only her close friend was aware that the model had already decided she was going to split from her boyfriend that night. Kimberly called her uncle at midday and informed him that she would be spending the day with Gabriella, her best friend, but would go back home to sleep. She later called Henry once more, promising to return by midnight and requesting that he not lock the front door since she had forgotten her keys. While at her friend's house, Kimberly practiced what she was going to say to her boyfriend. She picked her words carefully to avoid offending him and causing any angry outbursts, and even though it was really tough, she finally seemed to have found the right delicate phrases and was prepared for the crucial conversation. Henry followed instructions and went to bed, completely trusting his niece in the evening. Rafael showed up at her friend's house in his brand new white Audi at around 9 o'clock in the evening. Kimberly said goodbye to Gabriella, smiled as she walked out to him, and sat down beside the driver in the passenger seat. Nobody ever saw the girl alive again, and the couple's disappearance was strange. When Henry awoke on the morning of May 11 and saw that his niece was not home, he got quite concerned. Kimberly always let him know when she would be coming back and if she was going to spend the night at a friend's house. Her phone was off when he tried to reach her. Gabriella informed him that Kimberly had gone out with her boyfriend and had not been in contact since. It was odd that Raphael didn't answer when Henry called him. The fact that the girl had never before skipped her university classes was quickly revealed. By midday, Henry went to the police to report the girl and her boyfriend's absence because he was certain that his niece was missing and that no one had seen her. The authorities, however, simply sneered at him, claiming that Oliveira and her partner were adults who could travel anywhere they pleased without anybody knowing. The missing girl's pals and Henry started their own search. Raphael's flat was their first stop, but nobody answered the door. Additionally, his car was not in the parking space. Kimberly's loved ones knew she would never go missing without alerting anybody, even though everything suggested the two had actually gone somewhere together. In the evening, Henry informed his sister Nayla of the situation over the phone. He couldn't wait any longer because his relative, who was suffering from a serious illness, had been attempting to get in touch with her daughter all day and had a suspicion that something wasn't right. Since Kimberly avoided trouble, didn't maintain bad company, and didn't have any hazardous habits, he tried to reassure her that nothing negative could have occurred to her. Kimberly's pals started sharing her pictures on their social media profiles and in other groups. Give up inquiring about the whereabouts of the girl and her boyfriend Raphael. The teenage model was well known, so when word spread that she had vanished, thousands of followers joined the hunt. But that didn't work either. Unsettling finding in a locked apartment. The police didn't start investigating until May 12, almost 2 days after the pair vanished. Raphael's apartment was the subject of a search warrant, since it might hold information regarding the young people's location. However, everyone was astonished by what the authorities found when they broke through the locked door and entered the building. Sadly, there was nothing that could be done to save Kimberly, who was in one of the rooms. The young girl's lifeless body was covered with a sheet and lay on the bedroom floor in a big pool of her own blood. Additionally, the bed had multiple huge blood stains, and practically every room had blood smears and traces on the carpets and floor coverings. In order to prevent anyone from suspecting that a body was in the flat, the criminal clearly fled after realizing that his attempts to conceal the evidence were ineffective and turned the air conditioner on full blast to slow down the body's decomposition. 4 stab wounds, 2 to the neck and 2 to the chest, were discovered on the victim's body by the forensic specialists. The huge kitchen knife that was used was found in the adjacent room, along with the criminal's unmistakable fingerprints and bloodstains. The offender simply threw it on the ground without making any attempt to remove it or remove any traces. The girl was probably attacked unexpectedly because there were no defensive wounds or indications of a struggle on her body. She was killed on the floor after being struck in the neck, severing her carotid artery, but it seems the attack took place on the bed. The owner of the residence was missing, along with his documents, bank cards, car keys, and a few personal belongings. The condition of the room suggested that he had departed quickly. Raphael was reclassified as the main suspect in the heinous crime, even though he had previously been listed as missing. However, where can we search for him, and is it possible that he has already left the country? Find the elusive perpetrator. The forensic analysis verified that the missing Rodriguez's fingerprints were on the crime weapon. Any lingering suspicions regarding the man's guilt were eliminated when it was discovered that the apartment was occupied solely by the criminal and the victim at the time of the incident. Police stations all around the state received alerts about Raphael right once, and social media was used extensively to spread the word that a dangerous criminal was being sought and to ask for any information regarding his whereabouts. The white Audi that the man was driving was also searched for. Detectives examined every report from watchful residents because they knew that every minute mattered. In the nearby state of Caracaroí, a white Audi was discovered smashed in a ditch on the side of the road on May 13. It turned out that the suspect owned the vehicle. Raphael was seen speeding on surveillance footage. He apparently lost control. The vehicle went off the road and flipped over. The extent of the driver's injuries and his whereabouts were unknown, though. After an unsuccessful attempt to cross the border, there were rumors that he may have hitched a ride to the Venezuelan border and then fled there. It was quickly discovered that the individual hurt in the collision had, in fact, been taken to a nearby town by a passing vehicle. After removing nearly all of the funds from his account, Rodriguez took a taxi to the closest bank and then continued on to the border town of Boa Vista. He then made an attempt to flee prosecution by walking across the border into Venezuela. Luckily, limitations brought on by the deteriorating COVID-19 scenario prevented him from leaving the country. They wouldn't let the man pass. Detectives discovered that the suspect opted to hide in the forested area while waiting for the situation to calm down, instead of returning to Boa Vista, a city of around 300,000 people, and trying to blend in. The fugitive was located in a small hut deep in the forest, nearly hidden by the surroundings, after a few days of searching. But things didn't go as planned with the arrest. Men brandishing machetes, whom Rodriguez had hired from the local community for personal protection and lavished them with cash, unexpectedly attacked the cops. Thankfully, there was no violence. The authorities warned the bodyguards that helping the criminal might have major legal repercussions for both them and Rafael, as they displayed their badges and indicated that they were there to capture a dangerous criminal. The authorities had all the proof of the primary suspect's guilt by the time he was taken into custody, so there was no use in disputing it. According to surveillance footage, Kimberly got into his car, drove to his house, and climbed up to his apartment. A few hours later, Rodriguez fled the site by himself. It's interesting to note that the couple seemed at ease, smiling and having a great conversation in every video. Rafael casually left the apartment without showing signs of fear, regret, or guilt. The suspect gave a pretty odd account of what happened that day, but he acknowledged his guilt under the weight of the evidence. He claims that after deciding to enjoy a romantic evening, he and his sweetheart went to his place and shared private moments. After that, Rafael decided to examine Kimberly's phone while she was taking a shower and discovered that she had been conversing with other men on social media. Before he confronted her about it, he went to the kitchen and took a big knife and concealed it behind a pillow. He said he merely intended to frighten her in case she tried to trick him, not to hurt her. Rafael began grilling Oliveira about who she was speaking to as soon as she lay on the bed after taking a shower. "I'm not talking to any men," the girl responded with a simple smile. Rodriguez was furious about this. He became aware that his sweetheart was making fun of him and lying. Reaching for the knife, he swiftly struck her heart twice. Without having time to comprehend or fight back, the victim tumbled from the bed onto the floor, where the assailant struck her neck twice more, killing her. Rafael tried to hide the evidence after realizing what he had done, but he soon realized it was pointless. He just covered the body with a sheet and turned the air conditioner on full blast to make the room as chilly as possible, slowing the decomposition process, because he couldn't remove the body from the apartment undetected, and the suspicion would still be on him. Witness statements. Gabriela, Kimberly's closest friend, gave a witness statement in which she gave an entirely different account of what happened. That night, she said, Kimberly had finally made the decision to quit her relationship with her violent and mentally ill partner. Knowing that one incorrect word could make Rafael furious, she had taken her time crafting her response. Knowing that Kimberly's behaviors were always unexpected, Gabriela argued that Kimberly would never have joked about messaging other guys or been intimate with a man she intended to leave. Rodriguez's ex-wife, another witness, attested to his cruelty and his unpredictable outbursts of rage that affected everyone in his vicinity. Their divorce was primarily caused by his hostility. Rafael's mother, Fatima, was his sole advocate, claiming that he was a wonderful man who never intended to hurt anyone. She blamed her boy's immorality on Kimberly, her ex-daughter-in-law, and everyone else. After the trial, Rodriguez's father realized what a monster he had created, but he did not survive to witness the sentencing. By standing in front of a train, the old guy decided to take his own life. His widow maintained that it was an accident, claiming that her husband fell onto the rails by accident after feeling ill. The surveillance footage, however, unequivocally demonstrated otherwise. By obtaining fresh psychiatric assessments, the defendant's legal team continually postponed the case and promoted the narrative of his insanity. Rafael was ultimately found to be competent to face trial for his horrible deed. Almost a year and a half after the heinous incident, the trial started in October 2021, Raphael was given a remarkably light sentence of just 14 years in prison, which was later lowered by another year, despite the overwhelming proof of his guilt. The defense's successful claim that their client committed the crime while in a rage was the reason for this result. As a result, he was given a much lower sentence rather than life in jail. Nyla Oliveira, Kimberly's mother, died on October 28, the day of the sentencing, following a protracted fight with cancer. From her hospital bed, where she was in critical condition, she had watched every court session via video call. Her heart stopped a few hours after the verdict was declared. In less than a year and a half, the Oliveira family lost two members they loved, their beloved sister and daughter, then their mother and devoted wife. Since her son was the only close relative she had left following her husband's passing, Rodriguez's mother resolved to wait for him to be released from prison. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.